5 women traveled 1,000 miles to marry Caleb Mercer. 4 ran screaming before dawn. When the 5th bride stepped off that dusty stagecoach in Blackstone Hollow, the whole town knew she'd be gone by morning, too. What they didn't know was that behind the walls of his mountain ranch, Caleb was hiding someone who would change everything. This is the story of a woman who saw what others refused to see, a father fighting to protect his son, and a frontier town about to learn the difference between fear and truth. Stay with me until the end of this journey. Hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The stagecoach rattled into Blackstone Hollow on a Tuesday afternoon, kicking up dust that hung in the air like dirty gauze. Vivian Hale pressed her gloved hand against the window, watching the town materialize through the haze. A collection of weathered storefronts, a church with peeling white paint, and clusters of people who stopped mid-conversation to stare. She'd been traveling for 11 days. Her back ached from the hard bench seats, her dress was wrinkled beyond salvation, and somewhere around the Kansas border she'd lost the ability to smell herself, which was probably a mercy. But none of that mattered now. She was here. The stage lurched to a stop outside Brennan's general store, and before Vivian could gather her carpet bag, the driver had already climbed down and opened the door. He was a thick-necked man named Horace, and he'd barely spoken 20 words to her since St. Louis. Now he looked at her with something close to pity. "Miss Hale," he said, and that was all. Vivian stepped down onto the packed earth, her boots sending up small clouds of dust. The afternoon sun hit her full in the face, and she had to squint against it. When her eyes adjusted, she saw them, the townspeople, standing in doorways and on boardwalks, watching her with the kind of careful attention people reserve for accidents about to happen. A woman in a faded blue dress whispered something to her companion. 2 men outside the saloon had stopped talking entirely. Even the children had gone quiet. "They think I'm going to run," Vivian said quietly. Horace set her trunk down with more force than necessary. "Wouldn't blame you if you did." That's the 4th person who said something like that to me. Vivian turned to face him. "Since crossing into Montana, I mean. The station master in Helena, the woman at the last stop who sold me that terrible sandwich, the man who helped me with my trunk. Everyone keeps warning me about something, but nobody will say what." Horace pulled off his hat and wiped his forehead with a kerchief that had seen better days. "Look, I don't know what Mercer told you in his letters. He told me he was a rancher, widowed, that he had a son, that he was looking for a wife who could handle frontier life and wouldn't expect soft things. And you believed him?" "I believed he was honest." Vivian met his gaze straight on. "Which is more than I can say for most men who place advertisements." Horace made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been something sadder. "Honest, sure. He's honest about some things." He shoved his hat back on. "But there are 4 women who came through here in the past 8 weeks. 4 women, just like you, with trunks and hope and decent dresses. Every single one of them ran back to that stage like the devil himself was chasing them." The words settled into Vivian's stomach like stones. "Why?" "That's between them and Mercer." Horace climbed back up to the driver's seat. "But if you've got any sense, you'll get back on this coach, and I'll take you as far as Helena for free. I don't like bringing women out here just to watch them leave in pieces." Vivian looked down the main street of Blackstone Hollow. It wasn't much, maybe 200 people if you counted the surrounding ranches and homesteads. But it was the kind of town that made decisions about people fast and kept those opinions for life. She could feel their judgment already, settling on her shoulders like snow. "I came a long way," she said. "That's what the others said, too." Horace gathered the reins. "Stage comes back through on Saturday. I'll save you a seat." He cracked the whip, and the horses lurched forward, leaving Vivian standing alone in the middle of the street with her trunk and carpet bag and the weight of an entire town's expectations. She stood there for a moment, letting the dust settle. Then she picked up her carpet bag and started walking toward Brennan's general store. Her trunk could wait. She needed information more than she needed her second-best dress. The bell above the door chimed as she entered. The store smelled like coffee and leather and the particular mustiness of dry goods that had been sitting too long. Behind the counter stood a thin man with spectacles and the suspicious look of someone who'd been disappointed by people too many times. "Help you?" he asked, though his tone suggested he'd rather not. "I'm looking for Caleb Mercer's ranch," Vivian said. "I was told someone in town could give me directions." The man's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "You the new bride?" "I'm Vivian Hale, yes." "That's what I said." He turned and called toward the back room. "Martha, come see this." A woman emerged from behind a curtain of strung beads, short, round, with iron gray hair pulled back in a bun so tight it must have hurt. She looked Vivian up and down with the efficiency of an army quartermaster. "She doesn't look like the type to run," Martha said to her husband. None of them looked like the type. The man, presumably Mr. Brennan, crossed his arms. But they all did. Vivian set her carpet bag on the counter with enough force to make the small bell beside it jump. "I appreciate everyone's concern for my well-being, but I'm 26 years old, I've traveled over 1,000 miles, and I've made my decision. Now, I can either walk to the Mercer Ranch myself and probably get lost, or someone can tell me how to get there and save everyone the trouble of a search party. Which would you prefer?" Martha's mouth twitched. It might have been the beginning of a smile. "She's got spine, I'll give her that." "Spine doesn't matter if she's back on Saturday's stage," Mr. Brennan muttered. "Oh, shut up, Harold." Martha came around the counter. "The Mercer place is about 6 miles north, up into the foothills. Road's not bad if you stay on it, but this time of year the creek runs high, so don't try to shortcut across. You'll need a horse or a wagon. Can you handle a buggy? I grew up on a farm in Missouri. I can handle a buggy." "Missouri." Martha nodded as if that explained something. "Well, that's different than some of these city girls who came through. Last one was from Philadelphia. Took one look at the mud on Main Street and nearly fainted." "Philadelphia's loss," Vivian said. "About that buggy?" Harold Brennan sighed, like a man being forced to participate in his own funeral. "We've got one out back you can rent. $1 a day, $2 deposit. You break it, you buy it." "Fair enough." Vivian reached for her reticule. "Hold on." Martha put a hand on her arm. The woman's fingers were calloused and strong. "You seem like a sensible person, so I'm going to tell you something straight. Caleb Mercer isn't a bad man. Whatever you've heard, whatever people are saying, he's not cruel, he's not violent, he's not a drunk. But there's something in that house that sends women running, and it's not going to be different for you just because you've got grit." "What is it?" Vivian asked. Martha and Harold exchanged a look. It was Harold who finally spoke. "We don't know exactly. The brides don't talk about it, not really. They just leave. Fast." He adjusted his spectacles. "But if I had to guess, and I'm only guessing, mind you, it's got something to do with his boy." "Noah," Vivian said. "He mentioned him in the letters. Said he was 8 years old." "8, yeah." Martha's expression softened slightly. "Poor thing, his mother died when he was just a baby. Some kind of fever that came through here 3 winters back. Took her in less than a week." "That's terrible." "It was. Sarah was a sweet woman, quiet, like Caleb, but sweet." Martha released Vivian's arm. "The boy, well, he's different. People say things, cruel things, mostly. But whatever's going on up at that ranch, it's been enough to chase off 4 grown women who came here specifically to marry Caleb." Vivian absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. Different. It was a word people used when they meant something else, something they were afraid to say out loud. "How different?" she asked. Harold shook his head. "You'll have to see for yourself. We're not going to stand here gossiping about a child." "That's the first decent thing you've said all day," Martha told him. She turned back to Vivian. "The buggy's out back. Horse's name is Ginger, and she's old but reliable. You want someone to ride out with you?" "No, thank you. I'll manage." Martha studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right then, but you listen to me, Miss Hale. If you get up to that ranch and you don't like what you see, you turn that buggy right around and come back here. Don't wait for morning. Don't try to be polite about it. You just leave. We'll keep a room for you at Mrs. Halstead's boarding house if you need it." "I appreciate that." Vivian meant it. Despite their warnings, despite their obvious expectation that she'd fail, these people were trying to help in their own way. "But I don't plan on running." "None of them did," Harold said quietly. Malcolm. The road to the Mercer Ranch was exactly as Martha had described. Rutted and rough but navigable, winding up through stands of pine and aspen that were just beginning to show their fall colors. Ginger plodded along at a steady pace, unbothered by the climb, and Vivian let her mind wander as the buggy rocked and creaked. She thought about the letters. 3 of them, total. Caleb's handwriting had been neat but cramped, as if he wasn't used to writing much and wanted to fit as many words as possible on each page. He'd been direct about his circumstances, widowed, living on a cattle ranch with his young son, looking for a wife who could handle isolation and hard work. He'd asked about her experience with cooking, sewing, managing a household. He'd wanted to know if she could handle horses, and whether she was afraid of winter. He hadn't asked if she was pretty. He hadn't made promises about wealth or comfort. He hadn't tried to sell her a dream. That honesty had appealed to Vivian more than any flowery declaration could have. She'd answered his questions truthfully. Yes, she could cook, though not fancy. Yes, she could sew well enough to keep a family clothed. Yes, she'd grown up around horses and wasn't afraid of hard work or long winters. She told him about her family's farm in Missouri, about her father's death 2 years back, about her brother Daniel, who was different in ways that people in their town hadn't understood or accepted. She told him about the way people had looked at Daniel, the way they'd whispered, the way they'd suggested he be sent away somewhere he couldn't embarrass the family. She told him how her mother had died of shame before her time, worn down by the weight of other people's judgment. And she told him that she was looking for a place where she could be useful, where honesty mattered more than appearances, and where she wouldn't have to pretend things were other than they were. Caleb had written back within 2 weeks. His letter had been shorter than the others, just a few lines. Miss Hale, I appreciate your candor. My son is also different in ways that people don't understand. If you can accept that, and if you're willing to make a life in a place where neighbors are few and winters are hard, then I believe we might suit each other. The next stage arrives on the 15th. If you're on it, I'll be waiting. Caleb Mercer. It wasn't poetry. It wasn't even particularly warm. But it was real. And Vivian had built a life on real things. She'd sold what little she had, packed her trunk, and bought a one-way ticket to Blackstone Hollow. Now, bouncing along in a rented buggy with the afternoon light slanting gold through the trees, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. 4 women had run. 4 women who presumably weren't cowards, who'd made the same journey she had, who'd had their own reasons for coming. What had they seen that she hadn't anticipated? The road crested a rise, and suddenly the ranch spread out below her. Vivian pulled Ginger to a stop and just looked. It wasn't a grand place, not like the big spread she'd heard about in Texas or Wyoming, but it was substantial. A 2-story house built from squared logs and rough-cut lumber, weathered gray by mountain winters. A barn that looked solid and well-maintained, corrals with neat fencing. Outbuildings that suggested a working operation, not just a hardscrabble homestead. And everywhere she looked, she saw care. The fences had been mended. The barn door hung straight on its hinges. The woodpile near the house was stacked properly, covered against the rain. Even from this distance, she could see that the garden plot had been turned and put to bed for winter. This wasn't the ranch of a man who'd given up. This was the ranch of a man who kept going day after day, no matter what. Vivian clicked her tongue, and Ginger started forward again, down the slope toward the house. As they approached, the front door opened. The man who stepped out was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the kind of build that came from a lifetime of physical work. He wore dark trousers, a shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and suspenders. His hair was brown and needed cutting, falling past his collar and the back. He had a beard, neatly trimmed, and eyes that Vivian couldn't quite make out from this distance, but felt nonetheless. He didn't move toward her. He just stood there on the porch, waiting. Vivian brought the buggy to a stop in front of the house and set the brake. For a moment, neither of them spoke. She could hear the wind moving through the pines, the creek running somewhere behind the barn, a horse snorting in one of the corrals. Miss Hale, Caleb finally said. His voice was deep and quiet, like he wasn't used to raising it. Mr. Mercer. Vivian climbed down from the buggy, grateful for the chance to stand on solid ground. I apologize for the delay. The stagecoach was behind schedule. Roads are rough this time of year. He came down the porch steps, moving with the careful deliberation of a large man who'd learned not to startle things. I wasn't sure you'd come. Why wouldn't I? Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or confusion. The others didn't, not all the way. 2 of them turned around before they even got to town. I'm not the others, Vivian said. Caleb studied her for a long moment. Up close, she could see his eyes were hazel, more green than brown, and there were lines at the corners that suggested he'd done a lot of squinting into bright sun. He had a scar along his left jawline, old and faded. His hands were work-roughened, the knuckles scraped. "No," he said finally. "I don't suppose you are." He reached for her trunk in the back of the buggy. "I'll get this. You can go on inside if you want. It's warmer." "I can help. I've got it." It wasn't sharp, just factual. He lifted the trunk like it weighed nothing and started toward the house, then stopped. "Miss Hale, before you go in." Vivian waited. Caleb set the trunk down on the porch and turned to face her fully. In the slanting afternoon light, he looked older than she'd expected. Not in years necessarily, but in the way a person looks when they've carried heavy things for a long time. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Something I should have put in the letters but didn't because I didn't know how." "All right. My son, Noah." Caleb's jaw tightened. "He's not like other children. He doesn't talk much, sometimes not at all. He doesn't like to be touched, doesn't look people in the eye. Loud noises scare him, strangers scare him, new things scare him. He lives in his own world most of the time, and I can't always reach him there." Vivian listened, her heart beginning to beat a little faster. Not from fear, but from recognition. "He's a good boy," Caleb continued, and there was something fierce in his voice now, something protective. "He's gentle, and he's smart in his own way, and he doesn't deserve the things people say about him. But I won't lie to you, he's hard to understand, hard to live with sometimes, if you don't know how to be patient. And the women who came before you, they took one look at him and decided he was broken, decided he needed to be sent away somewhere, locked up with people who could fix him." "And you sent them away instead," Vivian said quietly. "I sent them away," Caleb confirmed. "Every single one, because no woman who thinks my son is something to be ashamed of has any business being in this house." His hands had curled into fists at his sides, though he didn't seem to realize it. "So if that's what you're thinking, if you came here expecting a normal child who'll call you mother and mind his manners and make your life easy, you should get back in that buggy right now. I'll pay you for your time and trouble, put you up in town, and send you back on the next stage. No hard feelings." The wind picked up, sending leaves skittering across the yard. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called. Vivian looked at this man, this father, standing on his porch with his fists clenched and his heart on display, and she thought about Daniel. Daniel, who'd been 5 when their father first suggested sending him to an asylum. Daniel, who used to line up his toy soldiers in perfect rows and scream if anyone moved them. Daniel, who'd loved thunderstorms but hated the sound of church bells. Daniel, who'd been dead for 3 years now, because the institution their father had finally sent him to had been a place where different children went to die slowly, out of sight. "Mr. Mercer," Vivian said, and her voice was steady even though something was breaking open inside her chest. "May I meet your son?" Caleb blinked. Whatever he'd been expecting her to say, it wasn't that. "You... what?" "Your son, Noah. May I meet him?" She took a step toward the porch. "I didn't travel 1,000 miles to judge a child I've never seen, and I certainly didn't come here to tell a father how to raise his boy. So yes, I'd like to meet him, if that's all right with you." For a long moment, Caleb just stared at her. Then something in his shoulders loosened, just slightly, and he nodded. "All right," he said. "All right. But Miss Hale..." "Vivian." "Vivian." He said her name like he was testing it out. "He might not come near you. He might hide or run or... Just don't take it personal. It's not you. It's just how he is with new people." "I understand." Caleb didn't look like he quite believed her, but he picked up her trunk again and carried it to the porch. Then he opened the front door and stepped aside. Vivian gathered her skirts and walked into the house. The first thing she noticed was how clean it was. Not fancy, the furniture was simple and clearly handmade. The curtains were plain muslin, the rugs were worn, but everything was in its place. No dust on the mantel, no dishes piled in the dry sink, no clutter or chaos. The second thing she noticed was the silence. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of an empty house. It was the held breath silence of someone hiding. Vivian stepped further into the room, letting her eyes adjust to the dimmer light. The house had a main room with a stone fireplace, a kitchen area along one wall, and a staircase leading up to what must be the bedrooms. There was a table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair by the fireplace, shelves lined with books and various tools and household items. And in the corner, partially hidden behind the rocking chair, was a small boy. He was thin, too thin probably, with dark hair that fell into his eyes and Caleb's same hazel green gaze. He wore trousers that had been mended at the knees and a shirt that was clean but faded. His feet were bare. He was holding something in his hands, turning it over and over, a piece of wood, smoothed by handling, maybe 3 inches long. He wasn't looking at Vivian. He was looking at the floor, at the wall, at anything but her face. His shoulders were hunched, his body angled away, ready to bolt. Vivian felt Caleb come up behind her, could hear his quiet breathing. She knew he was watching, waiting to see what she would do, waiting for her to call his son strange, damaged, wrong. Instead, she did what she used to do with Daniel. She sat down, right there on the floor, 3 feet from the rocking chair, close enough to be present, but far enough to not be threatening. She arranged her skirts around her, folded her hands in her lap, and simply existed in the same space as this frightened child. Caleb made a small sound. Surprise, maybe. Vivian didn't look at him. She kept her gaze on the middle distance, not on Noah, not demanding anything, just being. The minutes stretched. The house settled around them with small creaks and sighs. Outside, the wind continued to move through the trees. Vivian could smell wood smoke and something cooking, stew probably, in a pot over the fire that Caleb must have started before she arrived. She didn't speak, didn't reach out, didn't do anything but breathe and wait. Noah's hands kept moving, turning the piece of wood over and over. His breathing was shallow and quick. Then, so slowly Vivian almost missed it, his eyes flicked toward her. Just for a second, then away again. She didn't react. Another minute passed, then another. Vivian's legs were starting to go numb from sitting on the hard floor, but she didn't move. Noah looked at her again, this time for 2 seconds, maybe 3. His hand stilled on the piece of wood. Vivian let out a long, slow breath. In her peripheral vision, she could see Caleb standing frozen by the door, his hand still on the latch. And then Noah did something that made Vivian's throat tighten. He reached out his hand, the one not holding the wood, and stretched it toward her. Not touching, not quite. Just extending it into the space between them, fingers slightly curled, waiting. It was the same thing Daniel used to do. The same tentative gesture that meant, maybe. Maybe you're safe. Maybe I can trust you. Vivian very slowly, very carefully extended her own hand, not touching Noah's, just mirroring the gesture, meeting him in that uncertain space. They stayed like that, 2 hands reaching toward each other across 3 feet of empty floor for what felt like a lifetime. Then Noah pulled his hand back, tucked it against his chest, and looked away. But something had shifted. Some invisible wall had developed a crack. Vivian slowly got to her feet, her knees protesting. She turned to look at Caleb and found him staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Shock, definitely. But something else, too. Something that looked almost like hope. Caleb's voice came out rough. He cleared his throat and tried again. He hasn't done that. With anyone. Not since his mother died. Not even with me, most days. It's not personal, Vivian said quietly. It's just how some people are built. Like they're tuned to a different frequency than the rest of us. And it takes time to find the right signal. Caleb was quiet for a moment, then, you had someone, didn't you? Someone like Noah. My brother, Daniel. Vivian glanced back at the boy in the corner. He'd gone back to turning the wood over in his hands, but his shoulders weren't quite as tight. People called him simple, touched, said he had demons. My father... She stopped, swallowed. My father sent him away when I was 19. Daniel died 6 months later in that place. They said it was fever, but I know better. He died because no one there understood him. No one tried. I'm sorry, Caleb said, and he sounded like he meant it. So am I. Vivian turned to face him fully. But I didn't come here to be sorry. I came here to make a life. And if that life includes a boy who needs patience and understanding instead of judgment, then that's fine with me. More than fine. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, and Vivian had the sense that he was seeing her, really seeing her, for the first time. Not as a potential bride, not as a solution to his problems, but as a person with her own scars and her own reasons for being here. "You should know," he said finally, "that it's not just Noah. The whole town thinks there's something wrong with him. My uncle, my father's brother, has been trying to take him away from me for over a year. Says Noah needs professional care. Says I'm being selfish, keeping him here." His jaw tightened. "If you stay, you'll be part of that fight. People will talk, they'll judge. It won't be easy." "Mr. Mercer," Vivian said. "Caleb, nothing about coming to Montana was easy. Nothing about leaving my home and traveling 1,000 miles to marry a stranger was easy. I'm not looking for easy. I'm looking for honest." She held his gaze. "Are you honest?" "I try to be." "Then that's all I need to know." She glanced around the main room. "Now, unless you've changed your mind about wanting a wife, I should probably figure out where to put my things and see if I can help with supper. That stew smells like it's about to burn." Caleb's eyes widened and he spun toward the fireplace, where the pot was indeed starting to smoke. He grabbed a cloth and pulled it away from the heat, muttering something under his breath that might have been a curse. And in the corner, so quietly that Vivian almost missed it, Noah made a sound. Not quite a laugh, but close. A small huff of breath that could have been amusement. Vivian smiled. Maybe, she thought, this wouldn't be so impossible after all. That night, Vivian lay in a small bedroom on the second floor and listened to the house settling around her. Caleb had given her the room that had belonged to his late wife. "It's the only other bedroom besides mine and Noah's, and it doesn't seem right to make you sleep on the floor," and had apologized for the simplicity of it. But Vivian didn't mind simple. The bed was sturdy, the quilts were warm, and there was a window that looked out over the dark shapes of the mountains. She could hear the creek running and the wind in the trees and, very faintly, the sound of Caleb moving around downstairs. He'd been quiet during supper. Not unfriendly, just careful, like he was still waiting for her to realize her mistake and leave. Noah had eaten at the table with them, though he hadn't looked at either of them and had arranged his food in careful groups before taking a single bite. Caleb had explained in that quiet way of his that Noah needed things to be just so, that change was hard for him, that he might not warm up to Vivian for days or weeks or possibly ever, and that was just how it was. Vivian had listened and nodded and made mental notes. Routine was important. Quiet was important. Patience was everything. After supper, Noah had disappeared upstairs without a word, and Caleb had helped Vivian clean the dishes in a silence that wasn't quite comfortable but wasn't hostile either. He'd shown her where things were kept: the root cellar, the smokehouse, the chicken coop, the barn. He'd pointed out which animals were gentle and which ones to watch out for. He'd given her a basic rundown of the daily routine, though he'd made it clear he didn't expect her to jump into everything right away. "You just got here," he'd said. "You're probably tired. Tomorrow's soon enough to figure out the rest." But Vivian wasn't particularly tired despite the long journey. Her mind was too busy turning over everything she'd seen as everything she'd learned. 4 women had run from this place. 4 women had taken one look at Noah and decided he was too much, too broken, too inconvenient. Vivian thought about the way Noah had reached his hand toward her, about the trust in that gesture, the hope, about how much courage it must have taken for a boy who lived in fear of the world to reach toward a stranger. And she thought about Caleb standing in the doorway with his fists clenched, ready to send her away rather than let anyone hurt his son. These were people who'd been wounded, people who'd learned to expect the worst from others because that's what they'd been given. Vivian knew what that felt like. She'd watched her brother be treated like an embarrassment, a burden, something to be hidden away. She'd watched her mother crumble under the weight of other people's disgust. She'd stood at Daniel's grave and known, with absolute certainty, that he'd died not from fever, but from loneliness and despair. She wouldn't let that happen to Noah. She couldn't. Outside, an owl called from somewhere in the darkness. Vivian closed her eyes and let the mountain silence wrap around her like a blanket. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was exactly where she needed to be, even if she was the only one who believed it yet. Morning came cold and clear, the kind of mountain dawn that turned the world sharp-edged and bright. Vivian woke to the sound of someone moving around downstairs, quiet footsteps, the creak of the stove door, the soft clank of a pot. She lay there for a moment, disoriented, before remembering where she was. The Mercer Ranch, her first full day. She dressed quickly in the dim light, choosing her most practical dress, dark gray wool that wouldn't show dirt. Her fingers fumbled with the buttons. Nerves, probably, though she wasn't quite ready to admit that to herself. She'd meant everything she said yesterday, but meaning it and living it were two different things. When she came downstairs, Caleb was at the stove, poking at something in a skillet. He glanced up as her footsteps hit the bottom step, and for a moment they just looked at each other. "Morning?" he said finally. "Morning." Vivian crossed to the kitchen area. "You're up early." "Ranch doesn't run itself." He turned back to the stove. "There's coffee in the pot. Cups are in that cabinet." Vivian found a cup and poured herself coffee that was strong enough to strip paint. She took a sip and managed not to wince. "How long have you been up?" "Hour or so. Fed the horses, checked the stock, brought in wood." He gestured with the spatula toward the window. "Weather's turning. We'll get snow before the week's out." "In September?" "We're high up. Snow comes early, stays late." He flipped whatever was in the skillet. Eggs, she realized, though they looked more scrambled by accident than design. "You sleep all right?" "Fine." It was mostly true. She'd woken twice during the night, confused by the unfamiliar sounds, but had fallen back asleep easily enough. "Where's Noah?" "Still in bed. He's not much of a morning person." Caleb scraped the eggs onto 2 plates and added some kind of bread that looked homemade but dense. "He'll come down when he's ready. Can't rush him." They ate in silence. The eggs needed salt and the bread could have used more rising time, but Vivian had eaten worse. She was halfway through her plate when she noticed Caleb watching her with a wary expression. "What?" she asked. "You're still here." Vivian set down her fork. "Where else would I be?" "I don't know. Gone." He looked down at his own plate. "The last one. The woman from Philadelphia. She didn't even make it through breakfast. Noah came down, she took one look at him, and that was it. Started crying. Said she couldn't do it. I had her back in town by noon." "I'm not from Philadelphia," Vivian said. "No." Caleb's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "No, you're not." Before Vivian could respond, there was a sound from upstairs. Not footsteps exactly. More like someone sliding along the wall, trying to be quiet. Then, slowly, Noah appeared at the top of the stairs. He was wearing the same clothes as yesterday. Vivian made a mental note to ask about laundry routines, and his hair was sticking up in the back. He had that piece of wood in his hand again, turning it over and over. His eyes were on the floor, tracking the grain of the boards. "Morning, son," Caleb said, his voice gentler than Vivian had heard it yet. "You hungry?" Noah didn't answer. He came down the stairs one at a time, both feet on each step before moving to the next. When he reached the bottom, he didn't come toward the table. Instead, he moved along the wall toward the corner where he'd hidden yesterday, giving Vivian a wide berth. Caleb stood and fixed another plate, eggs, bread, and some dried apples from a jar. He set it on the floor near Noah's corner, along with a cup of water. "There you go," he said. "It's still hot." Noah didn't acknowledge him, but after Caleb sat back down, the boy edged toward the plate and began eating, still standing, his back to the wall. Vivian watched this routine and understood what it meant. This was normal here. This was how breakfast worked. No forcing the boy to sit at the table. No demanding he use manners or make conversation, just meeting him where he was. "He eats better when there's no pressure," Caleb said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Took me a long time to figure that out. At first I kept trying to make him sit proper, use his fork right, all that. But it just made him more upset. So now," he gestured at the corner, "we do this." "It makes sense," Vivian said. Caleb looked at her like she'd just spoken in a foreign language. "Does it?" "Of course. Some people need space to feel safe. Nothing wrong with that." She took another sip of coffee. "My brother used to eat under the table when he was small. Drove my mother crazy, but he'd eat a full meal under there, whereas at the table, he'd barely touch anything. Eventually, she just started handing him his plate and letting him do what he needed to do. And that worked? Well enough." Vivian smiled a little. He grew out of it mostly. Found other places he felt comfortable. But the principle stayed the same. Meet him where he is, not where you think he should be. Caleb was quiet for a moment, and Vivian could see him turning this over in his mind. Then he said, "The women before you. They thought I was spoiling him. said he needed discipline, structure. One of them said, he stopped, his jaw tightening. Said what? Said he was acting like an animal and I was letting him. The words came out hard. Said if I really loved him, I'd send him somewhere they could train him to be normal. From the corner came a small sound, not quite a whimper, but close. Noah's hands had gone still on the piece of wood. Vivian felt something cold settle in her chest. And what did you say to her? I told her to get out of my house. Caleb's eyes were dark. Told her if she ever spoke about my son like that again, she'd regret it. She was on the stage by mid-morning. Good, Vivian said. Caleb blinked. Good? Yes, good. She was wrong. Noah's not an animal, and he doesn't need to be trained. Vivian glanced at the boy in the corner. He was eating now, small, careful bites, his shoulders slightly less tense. He needs to be understood. That's different. Most people don't see it that way. Most people are idiots, Vivian said flatly. Caleb made a sound that might have been a laugh, or might have been something breaking loose in his chest. He rubbed his face with both hands, suddenly looking exhausted. I don't know what to do with you. You don't have to do anything with me. I'm not a problem to be solved. Vivian stood and started clearing the plates. Now, are you going to show me around this place properly, or do I have to figure everything out by trial and error? For a moment, Caleb just sat there, staring at her. Then he stood too, and there was something different in his expression, something lighter. All right, he said, let's start with the chickens. Fair warning, though, the rooster's mean. I've met mean roosters before. Vivian rolled up her sleeves. I'm not afraid of a bird. Behind them, Noah made that huffing sound again, almost like a laugh. Vivian smiled. The morning passed in a blur of new information. Caleb showed her the chicken coop, which did indeed house a rooster with an attitude problem, the root cellar where vegetables and preserves were stored, the smokehouse, the barn with its 6 horses and various equipment, and the near pasture where a small herd of cattle grazed. He explained the daily routine, the seasonal work, the things that needed doing now versus the things that could wait until spring. He talked more than Vivian had expected. Not constantly, and not about personal things, but about the ranch, about how the irrigation worked, which fences needed mending before winter, where the best fishing was if she had time for that sort of thing. He talked like a man who'd been alone too long, who'd stored up practical knowledge with no one to share it with. Vivian listened and made mental notes. She'd grown up on a farm, but Missouri farming was different from Montana ranching. Different climate, different animals, different rhythm. She'd have to adjust. They were inspecting the barn roof, Caleb pointing out some loose shingles that needed replacing, when she finally asked the question that had been nagging at her since breakfast. What happened to Noah's mother? Caleb went still. For a moment, Vivian thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, fever. 3 years ago this winter. It came through town fast, killed 6 people in 2 weeks. Sarah was one of them. I'm sorry. Yeah. He touched one of the loose shingles, testing it. She was good with Noah. Better than me. She knew how to reach him when I couldn't. After she died, he stopped talking almost completely, stopped eating right, stopped sleeping. I thought... He stopped. Thought what? Thought I was going to lose him too. Caleb's voice was rough. He got so thin. Wouldn't let me near him. Wouldn't let anyone near him. The doctor said there was nothing physically wrong, that it was grief, said to give it time. But time didn't help. Not really. He got a little better, but he never came all the way back. Vivian watched Caleb's face, saw the guilt there, the worry that never quite left. You think you failed him? I know I did. I'm his father. I'm supposed to be able to help him, and I can't. I can't fix this. He gestured vaguely. I can mend fences and birth calves and keep this place running, but I can't make my son look at me. Can't make him talk to me. Most days I don't even know if he knows I'm there. He knows, Vivian said quietly. How can you tell? The way he eats the food you give him. The way he stays in the house instead of running off. The way he came downstairs this morning, even though there was a stranger at the table. Vivian turned to face Caleb fully. He trusts you. He might not show it the way other children do, but it's there. Caleb looked at her with something close to desperation in his eyes. I want to believe that. Then believe it. Vivian held his gaze. You're doing better than you think. You're meeting him where he is instead of forcing him to be someone he's not. That's more than most parents manage. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does, Vivian said. But it's what you've got, so you keep going. They stood there in the barn loft, dust motes floating in the light from the open door. And something passed between them. Not romantic, it was too soon for that, too raw. But something like recognition. Like two people who'd been walking parallel paths suddenly realizing they could see each other across the distance. Caleb cleared his throat and looked away first. We should head back. Noah gets anxious if I'm gone too long. They climbed down from the loft and walked back toward the house. The sun was higher now, warming the air, and Vivian could smell pine and wood smoke and the particular scent of mountain autumn. It was beautiful here, harsh, but beautiful. When they reached the house, Noah was exactly where they'd left him, in his corner, turning that piece of wood over and over. But when Vivian came in, he looked up, just for a second, just long enough for their eyes to meet. Then he looked away again, but his hand stilled on the wood. Progress, Vivian thought. Small, but real. The afternoon brought its own challenges. Vivian started on the laundry, sheets and clothes that had been piling up, and discovered that Caleb's definition of clean was different from hers. Everything was functional, but nothing was properly sorted or folded. She found Noah's clothes mixed in with Caleb's, found socks without mates, found a shirt that had been mended so many times it was more thread than fabric. She set up the washing outside, heating water in the big kettle over an open fire, and was elbow deep in soapy water when she heard footsteps behind her. Noah. He stood about 10 feet away watching her work. He still had that piece of wood, but he wasn't turning it over anymore. He was just holding it, his eyes tracking her movements. Vivian didn't acknowledge him directly. She'd learned with Daniel that direct attention could spook him, make him retreat. Instead, she just kept working, scrubbing a shirt against the washboard, wringing it out, dropping it in the rinse water. Noah took a step closer. Vivian started humming. Nothing in particular, just a melody that had been running through her head, something her mother used to hum while she worked. Another step closer. Vivian wrung out the shirt and hung it on the line Caleb had strung between two posts. The fabric was heavy with water dripping onto the grass. Noah was 5 feet away now, close enough that she could see him clearly in her peripheral vision. He was watching her hands, the way she moved, the rhythm of the work. Vivian picked up another shirt, one of Noah's, small and worn, and dunked it in the wash water. As she scrubbed, she said very casually, "This is hard work. My arms always get tired." Noah didn't respond, but he didn't leave either. Vivian continued. "When I was young, my mother used to let me help. I wasn't very good at it. I'd get more water on myself than on the clothes." She smiled at the memory, but she was patient, said the only way to learn was to do it, even if you did it wrong at first. She wrung out Noah's shirt and held it up, examining it. "This one's got a tear in the sleeve. I'll mend it later, if that's all right." Noah took another step closer. He was 3 feet away now, then 2. Vivian kept her eyes on the laundry, her movements steady and unhurried. She picked up another piece, a pair of Caleb's work pants, and started scrubbing. And then Noah did something that made Vivian's breath catch. He reached out and touched the wet fabric of his shirt where it hung on the line, just his fingertips, testing the texture. His face was intensely focused, like he was solving a complicated problem. "It's cold, isn't it?" Vivian said quietly. "The water. It'll be warmer once the sun dries it out." Noah pulled his hand back and looked at his wet fingers. Then slowly, he touched them to his own shirt, transferring the dampness, testing it. Vivian kept working, giving him space to explore. She didn't ask questions, didn't demand he respond. She just existed alongside him, letting him set the pace. After a few minutes, Noah stepped back. But he didn't go far, just to the edge of the clearing, where he sat down in the grass and continued to watch. Vivian finished the laundry, her back aching and her hands raw from the lye soap. When she looked up, Noah was drawing something in the dirt with a stick. Not the piece of wood he always carried, that was tucked safely in his pocket, but a longer stick he'd found nearby. She couldn't see what he was drawing from where she stood, but the concentration on his face was absolute. That evening, Caleb noticed the change immediately. He'd been out checking the cattle and came back to find Noah sitting at the table, not eating, not doing anything in particular, just sitting while Vivian prepared supper. He stopped in the doorway, staring. He's at the table, he said, like he couldn't quite believe it. He's at the table, Vivian confirmed. She was cutting vegetables for a stew, working with the kind of efficiency that came from years of practice. Has been for about 10 minutes. He never sits at the table unless it's time to eat. And even then, Caleb stopped, shook his head. What did you do? Nothing. I did laundry. He watched. Then he came inside and sat down. Vivian glanced at Noah, who was tracing patterns on the wooden surface with one finger. I didn't ask him to. Caleb pulled off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. I don't understand. You don't have to understand, just accept it. Vivian dropped the vegetables into the pot. He's here because he wants to be. That's enough. Caleb sat down across from his son, moving slowly, carefully. Noah didn't look up, but he didn't bolt either. He just kept tracing his patterns, the ghost of some design only he could see. Good day? Caleb asked him, his voice soft. Noah didn't answer. We got the north fence mended, the section that was sagging. Should hold through winter now. Caleb paused. You want to help me check the horses after supper? I know you like the bay mare. Nothing. But Noah's finger paused for just a moment before continuing its invisible drawing. Caleb looked at Vivian, and she could see the question in his eyes. Am I doing this right? She gave him a small nod. Keep going. There's an owl nesting in the big pine, Caleb continued. Saw it this morning when I was bringing in wood. Big one. Probably hunting the mice in the barn. He watched his son's face. You might be able to see it from your window at night if you look. Noah's hand went still. Then so quietly Vivian almost missed it. He made a sound. Not a word, but a sound. Interested. Caleb's whole face changed. Yeah? You want to look for it later? Noah's hand moved again, resuming the patterns. But there was something different in his posture now, something less rigid. They ate supper with Noah at the table. He didn't interact with them, didn't make eye contact, but he was there, present in a way he hadn't been the night before. And when Vivian served the stew, he ate it from a proper bowl instead of taking his plate to the corner. Small things. But Caleb looked at those small things like they were miracles. After supper, Vivian cleaned up while Caleb took Noah out to check the horses. She watched them go from the kitchen window, the tall man and the small boy, walking side by side but not touching, heading toward the barn in the gathering dusk. Noah's hands were moving, fluttering at his sides, and Vivian recognized that too. The need to move, to release the energy that built up inside when the world got too big or too loud. She was drying the last plate when Caleb came back alone, his expression troubled. He's in the barn, Caleb said before Vivian could ask. He likes to sit with the horses sometimes. Calms them down. That's good, isn't it? Usually, yeah. Caleb leaned against the doorframe. But I need to talk to you about something. Something I should have told you before. But I was hoping it wouldn't matter. Vivian set down the plate. What is it? My uncle, Everett Mercer. Caleb's jaw tightened. He lives about 30 miles south, runs one of the biggest cattle operations in the territory. He's rich, he's connected, and he thinks Noah is an embarrassment to the family name. Lots of people think lots of things doesn't make them right. No, but it makes them dangerous. Caleb pushed away from the doorframe and started pacing. He's been after me for over a year to send Noah to an institution. Says it's for the boy's own good, that he needs professional care, that I'm being selfish keeping him here. I've told him no every time, but he won't let it go. He can't just take Noah, Vivian said. You're the boy's father. He can try. He's got lawyers, money, influence, and he's been building a case. Caleb stopped pacing and looked at her directly. The failed brides. Every woman who came here and left, Everett knows about them. He's using them as evidence that this isn't a stable home for a child, that I can't provide proper care. Vivian felt ice forming in her stomach. He's going to take you to court. He already has. Papers were served 3 weeks ago. Caleb's hands curled into fists. There's a hearing scheduled for next month. I have to prove that Noah is being properly cared for, that this is a good home for him. And the fact that I can't keep a wife... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Vivian stood there, absorbing this. She thought about Noah, about the way he'd reached toward her yesterday, about the fragile trust beginning to build. She thought about institutions, about the place where Daniel had died, alone and afraid, and convinced that his family had abandoned him. What do you need? She asked. Caleb looked startled. What? What do you need to fight this, to win? What do you need? I need... Caleb stopped, seeming at a loss. I need to show that Noah has a stable home, a real family. I need to prove that he's not better off locked away somewhere. But I don't know how to do that. Every time I try to explain what Noah needs, how he is, people just see what's wrong with him. They don't see... He gestured helplessly. They don't see him. Then we make them see him, Vivian said. We? Yes, we. Vivian crossed her arms. You asked me to come here. You asked me to marry you. I'm here, and I'm staying. That means Noah is my concern too. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. Vivian cut him off. I want to. There's a difference. Caleb stared at her, and Vivian could see him struggling with something. Hope, probably, fighting against the lessons of experience. He'd been let down too many times to believe easily. Why? He asked finally. Why do you care? You just got here. You don't know us. I know enough. Vivian thought about how to explain it, this thing driving her. I watched my brother die because people couldn't accept that he was different. I watched my mother break under the weight of other people's shame. I stood at Daniel's grave and swore I'd never let that happen to another child if I could help it. So yes, I care. And yes, I'm staying. And yes, we're going to fight this. Caleb's throat worked. I can't pay you. I mean, I can provide for you, give you a home, but I don't have money for lawyers or... I don't want money. I want to make sure that boy out there doesn't end up in a place that will destroy him. Vivian's voice was firm. Now, when is this hearing? October 15th. That gives us 3 weeks. Vivian's mind was already turning, planning. What do we need to prove? That Noah is cared for, that he's safe, that he's... Caleb paused. That he's getting better, I guess. That living here isn't making him worse. Is he getting better? Caleb's laugh was bitter. I don't even know what better means anymore. He's alive. He eats. He sleeps. Some days he lets me near him. Is that better? Or is it just surviving? It's better than the alternative, Vivian said quietly. Better than being locked in a room somewhere, away from everything familiar. Better than being treated like an animal that needs to be tamed. Everett will argue that an institution has doctors, specialists, people trained to handle children like Noah. People trained to force children like Noah into boxes they don't fit. Vivian shook her head. I've seen those places. They don't help. They just hide people away so the rest of the world doesn't have to look at them. Caleb studied her face. You really believe that? I know that. I buried the proof. They stood there in the kitchen, the lamplight throwing shadows on the walls, and something shifted between them. Not partnership yet. They didn't know each other well enough for that. But an alliance. A shared purpose. I should tell you, Caleb said after a moment, that if you stay, if you help me with this, the town is going to talk. They're already talking, but this will make it worse. Everett has friends here, people who agree with him. Let them talk. It won't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever is. Vivian moved toward the door. I'm going to check on Noah. You should get some rest. Tomorrow we start figuring out how to win this. She left Caleb standing in the kitchen and walked out into the cool evening air. The barn door was open, light spilling out from the lantern Caleb must have left for Noah. Vivian approached slowly, quietly, giving the boy time to notice her before she got too close. Noah was sitting in an empty stall, his back against the wall, the bay mare's head hanging over the gate above him. He was humming something, not a tune exactly, just a pattern of sounds. The mare's ears were forward, listening. Vivian leaned against the barn entrance, not going closer. She's pretty, she said softly. Noah's humming stopped, but he didn't run. Horses are good listeners, Vivian continued. My brother used to talk to them. Not with words exactly, but he'd sit with them for hours and they never judged him, never told him he was doing it wrong. The mare snorted softly and lowered her head, snuffling at Noah's hair. The boy reached up, slowly, carefully, and touched her nose, just his fingertips. I had a brother, Vivian said, speaking to the darkness as much as to Noah. His name was Daniel. He was a lot like you, I think. He saw the world differently than other people, heard it differently, felt it differently. People thought that meant something was wrong with him, but they were the ones who were wrong. Daniel wasn't broken. He was just Daniel. Noah's hand stilled on the mare's nose. He died 3 years ago, Vivian continued, her voice steady, even though her chest felt tight. And I miss him every day. But I learned something from knowing him, from loving him. I learned that different isn't wrong, it's just different. And the people who can't see that, the people who want to fix things that aren't broken, they're the ones who need help, not the children they're trying to change. The barn was quiet except for the soft breathing of horses and the rustle of hay. Then Noah turned his head and looked at Vivian. Really looked at her, his hazel green eyes meeting hers for the first time. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. Then he looked away again, back to the mare. But those 3 seconds felt like everything. Vivian pushed away from the door frame. Your father is worried about you. He loves you very much, even if he doesn't always know how to show it. And I just want you to know. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I'm not here to change you. I'm here to make sure no one else tries to either. She turned and walked back toward the house, leaving Noah with the horses and the quiet. When she reached the porch, she found Caleb sitting on the steps, his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. He looked at me, Vivian said softly. Caleb's head came up. What? Noah. He looked right at me. Just for a moment, but he did it. Caleb stood, and in the lamplight from the window, Vivian could see his face clearly. The hope there, the fear of that hope. He doesn't do that. Not with strangers. I'm not a stranger anymore, Vivian said. I'm the woman who's going to help you keep him safe. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then he did something Vivian didn't expect. He reached out and took her hand. Not romantic, not possessive, just a brief clasp, warm and calloused and real. Thank you, he said, his voice rough. Vivian squeezed his hand once, then let go. Don't thank me yet. We haven't won anything, but we're going to try. Inside the house, the fire crackled. Outside, the mountains stood dark against the stars. And in the barn, a small boy sat with a horse, and maybe, just maybe, started to believe that not everyone would hurt him. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. The next 2 weeks passed in a rhythm that Vivian hadn't expected, but found herself falling into anyway. Mornings started before dawn with Caleb already gone to handle the stock, and Vivian would come downstairs to find Noah in his corner, waiting. Not for her exactly, but near enough that it felt like progress. She'd make breakfast, getting better at it each day, learning what Caleb liked and what Noah would actually eat, and they'd share the space in their own peculiar way. Noah still took his food to the corner most days, but twice he'd stayed at the table the whole meal. Twice he'd looked at her when she spoke, really looked, before retreating back into himself. It was the small victories that kept her going. The way Noah had started following her outside when she did chores, staying 15 feet back but present. The way he'd touched the wet laundry again, then started bringing her smooth stones he'd found by the creek, lining them up on the porch railing without explanation. The way Caleb had started talking more at supper, not just about the ranch, but about other things. Books he'd read, places he'd been before settling here, memories of Sarah that didn't seem to hurt quite as much when he shared them. But hanging over everything was the hearing, October 15th. 3 weeks had become 2, then 10 days, then a week. And Vivian could feel Caleb's tension building like a storm gathering force. It was a Tuesday morning, 6 days before the hearing, when the rider came. Vivian was in the garden pulling up the last of the carrots before the ground froze when she heard the horse. She straightened, shading her eyes against the sun, and saw a man on a gray gelding coming up the road at an easy trot. He was well-dressed, too well-dressed for casual ranch visiting, in a dark suit and a hat that looked expensive. Even from a distance, she could see the confidence in the way he sat his horse. Caleb emerged from the barn, saw the rider, and went completely still. Vivian brushed the dirt from her hands and walked over to stand beside him. Who is that? Everett. The name came out flat, hard. My uncle. The rider pulled up in front of the house and dismounted with the ease of someone who'd spent a lifetime on horseback. Up close, Vivian could see the family resemblance. He had the same build as Caleb, the same strong jaw, the same hazel eyes. But where Caleb's face showed the weathering of outdoor work and worry, Everett's showed the smoothness of indoor life and power. He was maybe 50, with gray threading through dark hair, and he looked at the ranch the way a man might look at something he was thinking about buying and tearing down. Caleb, Everett's voice was smooth, cultured. It's been a while. Not long enough. Caleb didn't move from where he stood. What do you want? Everett's eyes shifted to Vivian, taking her in with a glance that felt invasive. And who might this be? Don't tell me you found another bride willing to try her luck. This is Vivian Hale, Caleb said, his voice tight. My wife. Vivian felt the lie hit her chest, but she didn't correct it. This wasn't the time. Everett's eyebrows rose. Wife? How remarkable. I hadn't heard about a wedding. We kept it quiet. I'm sure you did. Everett's smile didn't reach his eyes. Well, congratulations. Though I have to say, I'm surprised any woman would agree to marry into this situation. Have you told her about the boy? Noah is none of your concern, Caleb said. On the contrary, Noah is very much my concern. He's family. Everett tied his horse to the porch rail and straightened his jacket. And as family, I have an obligation to ensure he's receiving proper care. He's getting proper care. Is he? Everett looked around the yard, his gaze cataloging everything. Because, from what I understand, you've had 4 women run from this place in as many weeks. That doesn't suggest stability, Caleb. It suggests chaos. They left because they didn't understand Noah. That's their failing, not his. Or perhaps it's yours. Everett's voice sharpened. You're isolated out here, trying to manage a ranch and raise a difficult child on your own. It's not sustainable. You must see that. Vivian had heard enough. She stepped forward, positioning herself slightly in front of Caleb. Mr. Mercer, I appreciate your concern for your nephew, but I assure you he's being well cared for. This is a good home. Everett's gaze swung to her, assessing. And you've been here how long, Mrs. Mercer? A week? 2? Forgive me if I don't take your assessment as gospel. Long enough to see that Noah is loved and safe and allowed to be himself. That's more than he'd get in any institution. You say that with remarkable confidence for someone who knows nothing about modern medical facilities. Everett's tone was patronizing, like he was explaining something simple to a child. The institution I've selected for Noah has doctors trained specifically in managing children with his affliction. They use the latest techniques. Affliction? Vivian cut him off, anger flaring hot in her chest. Noah doesn't have an affliction. He's a child who processes the world differently than you do. That doesn't make him sick. It makes him unsuitable for normal life. Everett's voice went cold. He can't speak properly, can't interact with people, can't function in society. Left here, he'll grow into a man who can't care for himself, who'll be a burden on everyone around him. Is that what you want for him? I want him to have a childhood, Vivian shot back. I want him to have a father who loves him and a home where he doesn't have to be afraid all the time. What you're describing isn't help, it's imprisonment. Everett's mouth thinned. You're very passionate about a child you barely know. I know enough. I know what happens in places like the one you're describing. I know that children go in and don't come out. I know that latest techniques usually means restraints and isolation and breaking a child's spirit until they're too defeated to resist anymore. Vivian's voice shook with the force of her conviction. I won't let that happen to Noah. You won't let... Everett laughed, but there was no humor in it. You have no legal standing here, Mrs. Mercer. If that's even your real name, you're not Noah's mother. You're barely Caleb's wife, if the rumors are true. The rumors are wrong, Caleb said, finding his voice. We're married, legal and binding. Really? Everett pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. Because I took the liberty of checking with the county clerk's office. There's no marriage certificate on file for Caleb Mercer and Vivian Hale. No record of any ceremony. Vivian's stomach dropped. Beside her, she felt Caleb tense. Everett smiled, and it was the smile of a man who'd just played a winning card. So either you're lying to me, which won't look good in court, or you're living in sin, which will look even worse. Either way, it hardly suggests the stable family environment you're trying to claim. We were planning to make it official, Caleb started, but Everett waved him off. Save it for the judge. I didn't come here to debate your personal arrangements. He tucked the paper back in his pocket. I came to make you an offer. One last chance to do the right thing before this gets ugly. I'm not interested in anything you're offering. Hear me out. Everett's voice took on a reasonable tone, like he was being generous. I know you think you're helping Noah by keeping him here, but you're not. You're limiting him, holding him back. The facility I've chosen is in Denver. Modern, well-staffed, with grounds and activities designed specifically for children like him. He'd have structure, routine, professional care. And he gestured at the ranch. You could focus on this place. Make something of it. You're a good rancher, Caleb. You could build this operation into something substantial if you weren't distracted by a child who requires more attention than you can give. Noah isn't a distraction. He's my son. He's a responsibility you're not equipped to handle. Everett's facade of reasonableness was cracking. Be honest with yourself. You can barely get him to look at you. You can't teach him anything because he won't listen. He doesn't speak, doesn't engage, doesn't show affection. What kind of life is that for either of you? Vivian saw Caleb flinch and knew that Everett's words had found their mark. These were Caleb's own fears spoken aloud by someone else. He shows affection, Vivian said quietly. You just have to know how to see it. Everett turned to her, his expression almost pitying. You've convinced yourself of that because you want it to be true. But wanting doesn't make it so. That boy is never going to be normal, Mrs. Mercer. Never going to have a normal life, a normal family, normal anything. The kindest thing Caleb could do is accept that and make arrangements for professional care. The kindest thing would be to let him be who he is, Vivian countered. Not everyone has to be normal. Some of the best people I've ever known weren't. How touching. Everett's voice dripped sarcasm. But the court won't be swayed by sentiment. They'll want facts, evidence, proof that Noah is thriving here, which we both know he isn't. He looked at Caleb. 6 days, nephew. You have 6 days to reconsider. After that, a judge will make the decision for you, and I promise you won't like the outcome. Get off my land, Caleb said, his voice low and dangerous. I'm leaving, but think about what I said. Think about what's really best for Noah, not what makes you feel like less of a failure as a father. Everett untied his horse and mounted smoothly. See you in court. He wheeled the gelding around and rode off at a trot, leaving a cloud of dust and tension in his wake. Vivian and Caleb stood in silence, watching until he disappeared down the road. Then Caleb turned and walked toward the barn without a word. Vivian let him go. She understood the need to be alone with anger and fear, to process it somewhere private. Instead, she went looking for Noah. She found him in the hayloft, pressed into the far corner, his hands over his ears and his eyes squeezed shut. He was rocking slightly, that piece of wood clutched so tight, his knuckles were white. He'd heard everything, or enough of it. Vivian climbed the ladder slowly, making noise so he'd know she was coming. When she reached the top, she sat down about 6 feet away from him and waited. Noah kept rocking, his breathing fast and shallow. That man is gone, Vivian said softly. He's not coming back today. Noah's rocking didn't slow. I know he scared you. He scared me too, a little bit. He says mean things, and he doesn't understand what he's talking about. Vivian picked up a piece of straw and twisted it between her fingers. But here's what I need you to know, Noah. Are you listening? No response. But his rocking slowed fractionally. Nobody's going to take you away from here. Nobody's going to send you to some place where they'll try to change who you are. Vivian's voice was firm. Your father loves you. She paused, then continued. I'm not going to let anything happen to you. Do you understand? Noah's hand slowly lowered from his ears. His eyes were still closed, but he was listening. That man, your uncle, he thinks he knows what's best. But he's wrong. He doesn't know you. He doesn't see you the way your father does, the way I do. Vivian set down the straw. You're not broken, Noah. You're not something that needs fixing. You're just you. And that's exactly right. Noah's eyes opened. They were wet, and Vivian realized he'd been crying silently. He looked at her, and this time he didn't look away. It's all right to be scared, Vivian said. I'm scared too, but we're going to get through this, all of us together. Noah's mouth moved like he was trying to form words. Nothing came out, but the effort was there. Vivian waited. Finally, Noah did something she'd never seen him do. He reached into his pocket, pulled out that smooth piece of wood he always carried, and held it out to her. It took Vivian a moment to understand. This was his comfort object, the thing he touched when he was frightened or overwhelmed, and he was offering it to her. Are you sure? She asked softly. Noah's hand trembled, but he didn't pull back. Vivian very carefully took the piece of wood. It was warm from being in his pocket, worn smooth by months or years of handling. She turned it over in her palm, feeling the weight of what he'd just given her. Trust. Fragile and precious and real. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll keep it safe." Noah watched her for a moment longer. Then he slowly uncurled from his defensive position and crawled across the hayloft to sit beside her. Not touching, but close. Closer than he'd ever been. They sat like that for a long time, side by side in the quiet of the barn, while outside Caleb worked through his anger and the sun climbed higher in the sky. That evening, Caleb barely ate. He pushed food around his plate while Noah, back to eating in his corner but present, worked through his meal with mechanical precision. Vivian watched both of them and knew something had to give. After Noah went upstairs, she cornered Caleb by the fireplace. "We need to talk about what Everett said." Caleb stared into the fire. "There's nothing to talk about. He's right." "About which part?" "All of it." Caleb's voice was hollow. "We're not married. I can't prove Noah's getting better because he's not. And come hearing day, a judge is going to see a man living in sin with a woman he barely knows, trying to raise a child who can't even look at him. Everett's going to win. Not if we actually get married." Caleb turned to look at her. "What? Marry me. For real. We'll get the certificate, make it legal, and by the time the hearing comes around, we'll be a legitimate family." Vivian kept her voice steady. "It solves one of Everett's arguments." "Vivian, you can't." "I can. And I will." She moved closer. "Look, I know this isn't how either of us pictured our lives. I know it's fast and strange and probably crazy, but that boy upstairs needs us, and I'm not walking away from him. So yes, marry me. Not because you love me, we're not there and might never be, but because it's the right move to keep Noah safe." Caleb studied her face in the firelight. "You'd do that? Legally bind yourself to this mess?" "I'm already in the mess. Might as well make it official." Vivian managed a small smile. "Besides, I told Everett we were married. Hate to make myself a liar. This is insane. Probably, but it's also practical." Vivian crossed her arms. "We can go into town tomorrow, get the license, have someone perform the ceremony. Simple and quick. The town will talk." "Let them talk. They've been talking since I got here anyway." Vivian's expression turned serious. "Caleb, I'm not asking for a real marriage. I'm not expecting romance or promises or anything beyond what we already have, which is two people trying to protect a child. But legally, it makes sense." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You know what you're getting into? Really getting into? Because if we do this, if we stand up in front of people and make it legal, you're tied to me and Noah and all the trouble that comes with us. And there will be trouble, Vivian. Everett won't stop just because we got married. He'll find other ways to come at us. Then we'll deal with those too." Vivian held his gaze. "I'm not afraid of trouble. I'm afraid of doing nothing and watching that man take Noah away to some place that will break him. I've already lost one brother to people like Everett. I won't lose another child." Something in Caleb's expression cracked. "Noah's not your brother." "No, but he could be my son, if you'll let him." The words hung in the air between them. Caleb's throat worked, and for a moment Vivian thought he might refuse. Then he nodded, sharp and certain. "All right, we'll do it. Tomorrow." "Tomorrow," Vivian agreed. They went into town the next morning, leaving Noah with a neighbor woman named Mrs. Chen, who occasionally helped with the ranch and was one of the few people Noah tolerated. The ride was quiet, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts. The county clerk's office was in a small building next to the courthouse. The clerk, a dried-up man named Fletcher, who looked like he'd been born skeptical, took their information with barely concealed curiosity. "Mercer," he said, writing the name. "You're Everett Mercer's nephew." "I am." "Heard you got a hearing coming up." Fletcher didn't look up from his paperwork. "About your boy?" "News travels fast. It's a small county." Fletcher blotted the marriage license and pushed it across the counter. "You'll need 2 witnesses and someone licensed to perform the ceremony. Minister, judge, justice of the peace." "Where do we find those?" Vivian asked. "Judge Thornton's in his office, probably, though he might not be willing, given he's presiding over your custody hearing." Fletcher's tone was carefully neutral. "Might be seen as a conflict." "What about a minister?" Caleb asked. "Reverend Walsh is at the church, but he's friendly with your uncle. Fletcher finally looked up. "You're not going to find many people in this town willing to help you, Mercer. Everett's got influence." Vivian felt anger stirring. "So everyone's just going to let a child be sent away because his uncle has money?" Fletcher shrugged. "I didn't say I agreed with it. I'm just telling you how it is." They left the clerk's office with the license and a growing sense of frustration. Caleb was right. Everett's influence ran deep. "There has to be someone," Vivian said as they stood on the boardwalk. "Someone who'll help us." "Not many people in this town like me much," Caleb said. "And the ones who might help are afraid of Everett." Vivian looked up and down the street. It was mid-morning, and Blackstone Hollow was going about its business. Women shopping, men conducting trade, children running errands. Normal life, uncomplicated by custody battles and family feuds. Then her eyes landed on Brennan's general store. "What about the Brennans?" she asked. Caleb followed her gaze. "Harold and Martha? I don't know. They've never been unfriendly, but they've never exactly been friendly either. They helped me when I arrived, and Martha seemed like someone who might speak her mind, influence or no influence." Vivian started walking. "Worth asking." The bell chimed as they entered the store. Harold was behind the counter, and Martha was restocking shelves in the back. Both looked up as Caleb and Vivian approached. "Mrs. Mercer," Martha said, and there was something like approval in her tone. "Or should I say Mrs. Hale? Heard you're still up at the ranch." "I am. And it's going to be Mrs. Mercer, officially." Vivian set the marriage license on the counter. "We need witnesses and someone to perform the ceremony. Everyone else in town seems afraid to help us." Harold and Martha exchanged a look. It was Harold who spoke first. "Everett came through here yesterday, said there was going to be a hearing, said he was concerned about the boy." "Everett is concerned about his reputation," Caleb said. "Not about Noah." "That's what I figured." Martha came forward, wiping her hands on her apron. "Man like that doesn't spend money on lawyers out of the goodness of his heart. He's got an angle." "His angle is that he thinks Noah is an embarrassment," Vivian said, "and he wants him locked away where no one has to see him or think about him." Martha studied Vivian's face. "You really care about that boy, don't you? Even though you barely know him?" "I know enough, and yes, I care." "Why?" It wasn't accusatory, just curious. "Most women ran from that situation. You're running toward it. That doesn't make sense unless there's a reason." Vivian hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I had a brother. He was different, like Noah. My father sent him to an institution when I was 19. Daniel died there 6 months later. He was 14 years old." Her voice stayed steady through sheer will. "I won't let that happen to another child. Not if I can stop it." Martha was quiet for a moment. Then she turned to Harold. "We're doing this." "Martha, we're doing this," Martha repeated, firmer. "Everett Mercer can go to hell. I'm not standing by while he ships that little boy off to die in some asylum." Harold sighed, but there was no real resistance in it. "You're going to make enemies. I've had worse." Martha untied her apron. "Fletcher won't do the ceremony. He's too careful. But there's a justice of the peace over in Pine Ridge, about an hour's ride. A man named Carson. He doesn't care about Blackstone politics, and he'll marry anyone with a valid license." "You'd witness for us?" Caleb asked, and there was surprise in his voice. "We will." Martha looked at her husband. "Won't we, Harold?" Harold adjusted his spectacles. "Seems like we will." "Why?" Caleb asked. "You don't owe us anything." "No," Martha agreed. "But I owe myself the ability to sleep at night, and I won't sleep knowing I stood by while a child got hurt." She picked up the marriage license. "Come on, we'll close the store for the afternoon. This is more important." They rode to Pine Ridge in 2 wagons, Caleb and Vivian in one, Harold and Martha in the other. The justice of the peace turned out to be a grizzled man in his 60s who performed ceremonies out of his front parlor for $2 and didn't ask questions. The ceremony itself took less than 10 minutes. Carson read the words from a book that looked like it had been used 1,000 times. Harold and Martha signed as witnesses, and just like that, Vivian Hale became Vivian Mercer. It didn't feel momentous. There were no flowers, no fancy clothes, no guests beyond the Brennans. But when Caleb slipped a simple gold band, his mother's, he said quietly, onto Vivian's finger, something shifted. They were bound now, legally and publicly. Whatever came next, they'd face it as a unit. On the ride back to Blackstone Hollow, Martha pulled her wagon alongside theirs. "You should know," she called over, "that Everett's going to hear about this. Probably already has. He's got people everywhere." "Let him hear," Vivian called back. "We've got nothing to hide now. Just be ready for him to come at you sideways. That man doesn't fight fair." "Neither do I," Vivian said. Martha smiled, sharp and approving. "Good. You're going to need that." They were almost back to the ranch when Caleb finally spoke. "Thank you." Vivian looked at him. "For what?" "For this. For staying. For..." He paused, searching for words. "For seeing Noah. Really seeing him. Most people look at him and see a problem. You look at him and see a person. He is a person. A good one." "Yeah." Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. "I just hope the judge sees it that way too." Vivian didn't have an answer for that. She just looked down at the ring on her finger, still strange and new, and hoped that what they'd done today would be enough. When they got back to the ranch, Mrs. Chen was on the porch looking troubled. "What's wrong?" Caleb asked, climbing down from the wagon. "Nothing's wrong exactly, but while you were gone, a man came by. Lawyer type. Said he was gathering information for Mr. Everett Mercer." Mrs. Chen twisted her hands. "He asked a lot of questions. About Noah, about the ranch, about how things are run here. I didn't tell him much, but he asked," Caleb finished grimly. "He asked, and he watched the house like he was looking for something." Mrs. Chen glanced at Vivian. "He seemed very interested in you, Mrs. Mercer. Asked if you really lived here, how long you'd been here, whether you seemed to know what you were doing." "What did you tell him?" Vivian asked. "I told him you seemed perfectly capable, and it was none of his business." Mrs. Chen lifted her chin. "I don't care for people who pry into other folks' lives." "Thank you," Caleb said. "Where's Noah?" "In his room. He got upset when the lawyer came around. Been up there ever since." Caleb headed inside immediately. Vivian paid Mrs. Chen and thanked her again, then followed Caleb upstairs. Noah's room was small and plain, a bed, a dresser, a window that looked out over the mountains. Noah was curled on the bed, facing the wall, that piece of wood back in his hands. Wait, no, Vivian had that piece of wood. She'd put it in her pocket that morning and forgotten about it. She pulled it out now and looked closer. It wasn't the same. This piece was similar, but rougher, less worn. Noah had given her his precious one and found a replacement. Caleb sat on the edge of the bed, not touching his son, but close. "Hey, Mrs. Chen said you had a hard time." No response. "There was a man here. I know that probably scared you." Caleb's voice was gentle. "But he's gone now. And he's not going to hurt you. I promise." Noah's shoulders were rigid with tension. Vivian sat on the floor beside the bed, putting herself at Noah's eye level. She held up the original piece of wood. "I still have this. Been keeping it safe, like you asked." Noah's eyes flicked toward her, then away. "I need to tell you something," Vivian continued. "Your father and I, we got married today. For real this time, with papers and everything. That means I'm not going anywhere. That means we're family now, all three of us." Noah's hand stilled on the new piece of wood. "And family means we protect each other," Vivian said. "So whatever happens, whatever that man and your uncle try to do, we're going to stand together. Do you understand?" Noah didn't respond, but slowly, very slowly, he rolled over to face them. His eyes were red and his face was pale, but he was looking at them both. Caleb reached out, hesitated, then very gently touched Noah's hair. Just once, just briefly. Noah didn't pull away. "We're not going to let anyone take you," Caleb said, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't care what it takes. You're staying here. With us." Noah's throat worked like he was trying to speak. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. And then, in a voice so soft Vivian almost missed it, he whispered one word. "Promise?" Caleb froze. Vivian's breath caught. Noah had spoken. For the first time since they'd known him, he'd formed a word and pushed it out into the world. "Yes," Caleb said, and there were tears in his eyes. "I promise, son. I promise." Noah's eyes slid closed and his breathing gradually evened out. Within minutes, he was asleep, exhausted by the emotion, by the effort of speaking, by everything. Caleb and Vivian sat there in silence, watching him sleep. Then Caleb stood abruptly and left the room. Vivian found him a minute later on the back porch, his hands braced against the railing, his shoulders shaking. She put a hand on his back and said nothing. Sometimes there were no words big enough. After a while, Caleb straightened and wiped his face. He spoke. He did. I thought he never would again. After Sarah died, he just stopped. And I thought that was it. Thought I'd never hear his voice again. Caleb turned to look at her. But you've been here less than 3 weeks, and he's speaking. He's looking at people. He's trying.
He was always trying, Vivian said gently. You just couldn't see it before. No, I couldn't. Caleb's jaw tightened. And now Everett wants to take him away right when he's starting to come back. I can't. His voice broke. I can't lose him, Vivian. I can't. You won't. We won't let that happen. Vivian gripped his arm. 5 days until the hearing. We're going to use every single one of them to get ready. And when we walk into that courtroom, we're going to show that judge exactly what Noah has here. A father who loves him and a home where he's safe to be himself. Caleb looked at her, really looked at her, and Vivian saw the moment he decided to believe. Not because the odds were good, but because he didn't have any other choice. All right, he said. Tell me what we need to do. Vivian took a breath. First, we document everything. Every meal Noah eats at the table, every word he speaks, every moment of progress. We write it down with dates and times. Second, we find people willing to testify that this is a good home. Mrs. Chen, the Brennans, anyone else who'll stand up for us. And third, she paused. Third, we prepare Noah. Because he might have to be in that courtroom, and we need him to understand what's happening without terrifying him. That's a lot to do in 5 days. Then we'd better get started. They worked through the evening, making lists and plans. And upstairs, Noah slept with both pieces of wood clutched in his small hands, trusting in promises that 2 adults were desperately trying to keep.
The 5 days before the hearing moved with the strange quality of time when you're both desperate for it to pass and terrified of what comes after. Vivian filled a small notebook with observations. October 10th, Noah ate breakfast at the table without prompting. October 11th, spoke 3 words to Caleb about the horses. October 12th, made eye contact twice during supper. Small things that might seem trivial to anyone else but felt monumental when you understood what they meant. Caleb threw himself into ranch work with an intensity that bordered on punishing. Like if he just worked hard enough, he could somehow control the outcome of something that was already out of his hands. Vivian watched him repair fences that didn't really need repairing, reorganize the barn, chop enough wood to last 2 winters. She didn't try to stop him. Everyone had their own way of managing fear. On the morning of October 14th, the day before the hearing, Martha Brennan showed up at the ranch driving a wagon with 3 other women Vivian had never met. Reinforcements, Martha announced, climbing down. This is Susan Chen, you know her already, and this is Margaret Cooper and Alice Thornton. Vivian recognized the last name. Thornton? As in Judge Thornton? Alice was a slight woman in her 40s with graying hair and shrewd eyes. His wife. And before you ask, yes, he knows I'm here, and no, he doesn't approve. But Harold Thornton doesn't run my life, and I'll be damned if I watch Everett Mercer destroy a family without saying something about it. You're willing to testify? Vivian asked. I'm willing to tell the truth. Whether that helps you or not, I can't say. Alice looked around the ranch, taking in the neat fences and well-maintained buildings. But I've known Everett Mercer for 20 years, and I know a power play when I see one. This isn't about what's best for that child. This is about Everett getting his way. Margaret Cooper, a weathered woman who looked like she'd raised a dozen children and wouldn't tolerate nonsense from any of them, nodded sharply. I've seen how Caleb is with that boy. Saw them in town last spring when Noah had one of his episodes. Some men were making noise outside the saloon, and it scared the child something fierce. Caleb didn't get angry, didn't punish him, just picked him up and carried him somewhere quiet until he calmed down. That's good parenting in my book. We're here to help, Susan Chen added. Whatever you need. Vivian felt something tight in her chest loosen just slightly. Thank you, all of you. Don't thank us yet, Martha said. Everett's got witnesses too. I heard he's bringing in the 4 women who left, the previous brides. They're going to testify about conditions here, about Noah's behavior, about why they couldn't stay. Vivian's stomach sank. She'd known this was possible, but hearing it confirmed made it real. Do you know what they're going to say? Nothing good, I imagine. Everett's lawyer has been coaching them. Martha's expression was grim. And he's got Dr. Morrison testifying too, the one who examined Noah after Sarah died. Morrison's old school thinks different children need institutional care. So we're walking into an ambush.
Essentially, yes, Alice Thornton spoke matter-of-factly. But you're not without ammunition. You've got a legal marriage now. You've got witnesses who will speak to Caleb's character and the improvements in Noah's condition. And you've got the fact that Noah is clearly bonded to both of you, which any reasonable person can see matters more than medical theory. Is your husband reasonable? Vivian asked.
Alice smiled thinly.
Harold is bound by the law and by precedent, but he's also a father, and he's not blind. If you can show him that Noah is better off here than in some institution, he'll rule accordingly. The question is whether you can make that case strongly enough to overcome Everett's influence. Margaret pulled a basket from the wagon. We brought food. You're going to need your strength tomorrow, and I expect you haven't been eating properly with all this worry hanging over you.
She was right. Vivian had barely been able to stomach food for days, but the smell of fresh bread and something savory made her realize how hungry she actually was. They spent the afternoon together, these 5 women who barely knew each other but had aligned themselves on the same side of a fight that mattered. They helped Vivian clean the house until it shone, organized papers and documents, and rehearsed potential questions and answers. More importantly, they simply existed as proof that Vivian and Caleb weren't alone in this. Noah watched from his corner, wary of the strangers, but not hiding entirely. At one point, Martha sat down on the floor near him, not close, but within his line of sight, and started talking about her own grandson who'd been born blue and not breathing, who doctors said would be slow if he survived at all. He was 10 now, she said, and smart as a whip, just needed time to find his own way. Vivian saw Noah's hands still on his piece of wood. He was listening. When the women finally left as the sun was setting, Vivian stood on the porch and watched them go, feeling something she hadn't felt in weeks. Not quite hope, but close. The possibility of it. Caleb came to stand beside her. That was something. It was. I didn't know people would... He trailed off. Would care? Yeah. Caleb's voice was rough. I've spent so long feeling like it was just me and Noah against everyone. Didn't realize there were people willing to stand with us.
There usually are, Vivian said. You just have to let them see what they're standing for. That night, Vivian found Noah sitting by his window, looking out at the dark shapes of the mountains. She sat down beside him, and they stayed like that in companionable silence for a while. Tomorrow is going to be hard, Vivian finally said. There's going to be a lot of people and a lot of talking, and some of it might be scary. But your father and I are going to be right there the whole time.
Noah's hands tightened on the windowsill. You might have to be in the room for part of it. The judge, that's the man who makes the decisions, he might want to see you, but nobody is going to force you to talk or do anything you don't want to do. We won't let them. Vivian pulled out the original piece of wood from her pocket and set it on the sill between them. You gave this to me when you were scared. I'm giving it back now because I think you might need it tomorrow more than I do. Noah looked at the wood, then at Vivian. His mouth opened, and she could see him struggling to form words. Finally, he whispered, "Stay?" Vivian's throat tightened. I'm staying, I promise. No matter what happens tomorrow, I'm not leaving. Papa too? Your papa especially. Nobody is taking you away from him. That's what tomorrow is about, making sure everyone knows that. Noah was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up the piece of wood and closed his small hand around it. Okay, just one word, but it carried the weight of trust that Vivian knew was hard-won and precious. She put her arm around his thin shoulders slowly, giving him time to pull away if he needed to. He didn't. Instead, he leaned into her slightly, and they sat together watching the stars come out over the mountains. The courtroom in Blackstone Hollow was smaller than Vivian had expected. Just a single room in the county building with wooden benches, a judge's platform, and windows that let in the cold October morning light. It smelled like old paper and floor wax, and the nervous sweat of people waiting for their lives to be decided by strangers. Vivian sat in the front row beside Caleb, her hands folded tightly in her lap to keep them from shaking. Noah was with Mrs. Chen in a separate room. The judge had agreed he didn't need to be present for the initial proceedings, though he might be called later. That small mercy was something, at least. Everett sat on the opposite side of the aisle with his lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Carlyle, who looked expensive and competent. Behind them sat the 4 women who'd fled the ranch. Vivian recognized one from town, the Philadelphia woman, pale and pinched. The others were strangers. All of them looked nervous. Behind Vivian and Caleb sat Martha and Harold Brennan, Susan Chen's husband, Margaret Cooper, and Alice Thornton, who'd positioned herself where her husband couldn't avoid seeing her. A small showing, but more than Vivian had expected. Judge Thornton entered and everyone stood. He was a tall man with iron gray hair and the kind of face that gave nothing away. He sat, arranged some papers, and looked out over the courtroom with an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else.
This is a custody hearing regarding Noah Mercer, age 8, he began, his voice carrying easily in the small space. Petitioner is Everett Mercer, uncle and closest living relative besides the father. Respondent is Caleb Mercer, current guardian. Both parties are present with counsel. He looked at Caleb. You're representing yourself, Mr. Mercer? Can't afford a lawyer, Your Honor, Caleb said, standing. But I can speak for myself and my son. Very well. Mr. Carlyle, you may present your opening statement. Carlyle stood smoothly. He was good. Vivian could tell that within the first 30 seconds. He painted a picture of an isolated ranch, a struggling single father, a child with significant difficulties who required specialized care. He talked about the 4 failed attempts at establishing a stable home environment, about Noah's inability to communicate or function normally, about the professional facilities available that could provide structure and treatment. This is not about Mr. Caleb Mercer's character, Carlyle said, his tone reasonable. By all accounts, he's a hardworking man who loves his son. But love alone is not sufficient when a child has needs beyond what an untrained parent can provide. My client, Mr. Everett Mercer, has arranged placement at the Riverside Institute in Denver, a respected facility with medical staff, educational programs, and experience treating children with afflictions similar to Noah's. This is about doing what's best for the child, even when what's best is difficult. He sat down, and Vivian felt Caleb tense beside her like he wanted to stand up and punch something. She put her hand on his arm, steadying him. Judge Thornton looked at Caleb. Your response? Caleb stood, and for a moment he just stood there, all that height and breadth of him, looking like he was trying to compress everything he felt into words that would make sense to strangers. My son is not afflicted, he said finally. He's different. He sees the world in ways most of us don't, and that makes things hard for him sometimes. But that doesn't mean he's broken. It doesn't mean he needs to be locked away somewhere. His voice was steady but strained. Since his mother died, I've been doing my best to raise him, to give him a home where he feels safe. And yes, I made mistakes. I tried to find a wife, tried to give him a mother, and it didn't work out. Those women came here expecting a normal child, and when they saw Noah was different, they left. But that's not Noah's fault. That's not evidence that he needs institutional care. That's evidence that some people can't see past their own expectations. And yet, Judge Thornton said, you now have a wife. Mrs. Vivian Mercer, married just days ago. Some might say the timing is convenient. Vivian stood before she could second-guess herself. Your Honor, may I speak? Thornton's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. Briefly, the timing was practical, Vivian said, keeping her voice calm. My husband and I married quickly because we knew this hearing was coming and we knew it would be used against him if we didn't make our commitment legal. But the commitment itself isn't new. I came here 3 weeks ago intending to marry Caleb Mercer and help raise his son. I've spent those weeks getting to know Noah, learning what he needs, seeing what kind of home this is. And I can tell you with absolute certainty that sending that child to an institution would be the worst thing anyone could do to him. You have experience with institutional care? Thornton asked. Vivian's hands clenched. I do. My younger brother was sent to an asylum when he was 14 because he was different in similar ways to Noah. He died there 6 months later. They called it fever, but I know what really killed him, being separated from everyone who loved him, being treated like a problem to be solved instead of a person to be understood. I won't let that happen to Noah. That's a compelling personal story, Mrs. Mercer, but this court requires more than emotion. It requires evidence. Thornton looked at Carlyle.
Call your first witness. Carlisle called Dr. Morrison, who took the stand with the authority of someone used to being listened to. He was in his 60s, with white mutton chops and an old-fashioned collar. He testified that he'd examined Noah 3 years prior after Sarah's death and found him to be severely withdrawn, nonverbal, and unresponsive to normal stimuli. In my professional opinion, Morrison said, the child exhibited signs of profound mental deficiency, possibly complicated by nervous disorder. I recommended at the time that he receive specialized care, but Mr. Mercer declined. And what is your opinion now? Carlisle asked. I haven't examined the child recently, but based on reports of his continued inability to speak, to socialize, or to function in normal society, I maintain my original assessment. He requires professional intervention that cannot be provided in a home setting. Caleb was allowed to cross-examine, and he stood with visible effort at controlling his anger. Dr. Morrison, when you examined Noah, how long did you spend with him? Approximately 20 minutes. 20 minutes. And in that 20 minutes, my son, who'd just lost his mother and was surrounded by strangers, didn't respond the way you expected, so you labeled him deficient? Morrison's face reddened. I conducted a thorough examination using established protocols. Did you ask me what he was like before Sarah died? Did you ask if he'd always been this way, or if it was grief? Mr. Mercer, a child who cannot communicate or engage with the world will He communicates just fine. You just weren't listening. Caleb's voice was tight. He's scared of new people and loud noises and things he doesn't understand. That doesn't make him deficient. That makes him cautious. Mr. Mercer, Judge Thornton interrupted, this isn't a debate. Do you have questions for the witness or not? Caleb took a breath. Dr. Morrison, have you visited my ranch in the past 3 years? No. Have you observed Noah in his home environment where he's comfortable? No, but have you spoken to anyone who sees him regularly about his progress or his capabilities? I've reviewed reports. That's a no then. Caleb sat down. Carlisle called the 4 women next, one after another. Each of them told essentially the same story. They'd arrived expecting to marry Caleb and help raise his son, but Noah's behavior had been too much. He wouldn't speak to them, wouldn't look at them, ran away or hid when they approached. One woman, the one from Philadelphia, described coming downstairs the first morning to find Noah eating off the floor like an animal. Another talked about how he'd screamed when she tried to touch him, a sound she described as inhuman. I tried, the Philadelphia woman said, dabbing at her eyes. I really did. But that child needs help I couldn't provide. Professional help. It's not fair to him to keep him isolated out there. Vivian watched Caleb's face go darker with each testimony. She wanted to tell him it didn't matter what these women said, but she knew that wasn't true. It did matter. Their words were building a picture of a home in chaos, a child out of control. When it was Caleb's turn to question them, he kept it brief. Miss Patterson, he said to the Philadelphia woman, how many days were you at my ranch? 3 days. And in those 3 days, did you make any attempt to understand why Noah behaves the way he does? I asked you about him. Did you sit with him? Did you give him space? Did you try to meet him where he was instead of expecting him to meet you? Miss Patterson looked flustered. I'm not a doctor. I didn't know what to do with a child like that. Exactly, Caleb said quietly. You didn't know, so you left. That's not evidence about Noah, that's evidence about you. By the time they broke for lunch, Vivian felt wrung out. The testimony had been brutal, each word painting Noah as something broken and Caleb as stubborn for not seeing it. They ate in tense silence in a small office the judge had let them use. Caleb stared at his sandwich without eating it. They made him sound like a monster, he finally said. They made him sound like a scared child who doesn't know how to trust strangers, Vivian corrected. There's a difference. The judge has to see that. Does he? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like we're losing. Vivian wanted to argue, but she couldn't. It did look bad. She stood and paced to the window, looking out at the street where normal life continued, unaware that inside this building, a child's future was being decided by people who'd never really met him. We have witnesses this afternoon, she said. Martha and the others. That will help. Will it? Or will Carlisle tear them apart too? Before Vivian could answer, there was a knock at the door. Susan Chen stuck her head in, looking worried. Noah's asking for you, she said to Vivian. He's upset. I think he knows something's wrong. Vivian looked at Caleb, who nodded. Go. I'll wait here. She found Noah in the small side room, pacing back and forth with his hands fluttering at his sides. Mrs. Chen stood in the corner, giving him space but looking anxious. Noah, Vivian said softly. He turned toward her voice and she saw the panic in his eyes. He'd been crying. His face was blotchy and his breathing was too fast.
Hey, she said, keeping her voice calm. It's all right. We're right here.
Noah's mouth opened and closed. He was trying to speak but couldn't get the words out. His hands moved faster, and Vivian recognized the signs of him spiraling into overwhelm. She sat down on the floor, making herself small and non-threatening. You don't have to talk. Just breathe with me, okay? In and out. She made a show of taking slow, deep breaths. Noah watched her, his chest heaving. In, Vivian said softly. And out. In and out. Gradually, Noah's breathing began to slow to match hers. His hands stopped fluttering quite so wildly. That's good, Vivian encouraged. You're doing so good. Noah took 2 shaky steps toward her, then crumpled. He didn't quite touch her, but he sat close enough that she could feel the heat of him, the trembling. His hands gripped his piece of wood so hard she worried it might splinter.
I know you're scared, Vivian said. I'm scared too. But your papa and I are fighting for you. We're making sure you get to stay home where you belong. The man, Noah whispered. What man, honey? The bad man. Uncle. Noah's voice was barely audible. He wants to take me away. Vivian's chest constricted, so he understood more than they'd realized. Of course he did. He was quiet, not deaf. Different, not stupid. He wants to, Vivian agreed, because lying would only make it worse. But we're not going to let him. That's what's happening in there. We're telling the judge why you should stay with us. What if you lose? The question was so small, so terrified. Vivian wanted to promise they wouldn't, wanted to swear up and down that everything would be fine. But Noah deserved truth, not false comfort. If we lose, she said carefully, then we'll figure out what to do next. But Noah, listen to me. No matter what happens in that room, your father loves you, I love you, and we will fight for you as long as we have breath in our bodies. Do you understand? Noah looked at her with those hazel green eyes that were so like his father's, so full of fear and fragile trust. Then he did something that broke Vivian's heart and put it back together at the same time. He leaned against her, his small body pressed into her side, and whispered, "Don't let them take me." Vivian wrapped her arms around him and held on. "I won't. I promise you, I won't." When court resumed, Carlyle rested his case. It was Caleb's turn to present his defense, and Vivian could feel the tension radiating off him as he stood. "I'd like to call Martha Brennan to the stand," he said. Martha testified about the changes she'd seen in Noah since Vivian arrived, how he'd started interacting more, eating at the table, even speaking occasionally. She talked about Caleb's character, about how he'd always treated his son with patience and respect, even when others told him to be harsher. Carlyle's cross-examination was brief but pointed. "Mrs. Brennan, you run a store in town, is that correct?" "Yes." "And the Mercers are customers?" "Among others, yes." "So you have a financial interest in maintaining good relations with them?" Martha's eyes narrowed. "I have a moral interest in not seeing a child destroyed by people who think different means broken. The money doesn't enter into it." Next came Margaret Cooper, who testified about seeing Caleb handle Noah's episode in town with patience. Then Alice Thornton, who spoke carefully but clearly about her observations of the ranch and her concerns about Everett's motivations. Carlyle tried to undermine each of them, but they held firm. By the time Susan Chen finished testifying about Noah's progress, Vivian felt like maybe, just maybe, they were building something solid enough to stand on. Then Judge Thornton said the words Vivian had been dreading. "I'd like to see the child." The room went silent. Caleb's face went pale. "Your Honor," he started, "Noah doesn't do well with strangers or new places. Bringing him in here, I'm aware of his difficulties, Mr. Mercer, but I can't make a decision about his welfare without observing him myself. Bring him in." Mrs. Chen went to get Noah, and Vivian felt her heart hammering. This could go so wrong. If Noah panicked, if he couldn't handle the courtroom,
It would only prove Carlisle's point about him needing institutional care. The door opened and Noah came in, Mrs. Chen's hand hovering near his shoulder, but not touching. He was pale, his eyes too wide, his hands gripping that piece of wood like a lifeline. He looked at the room full of strangers and froze. "Come here, son," Caleb said gently, standing. Noah didn't move. His breathing was getting faster, his hands starting to flutter. Vivian stood slowly and walked toward him, not rushing. When she reached him, she knelt down to his level. "Remember what I said?" she murmured. "We're right here. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do. Just be yourself." Noah's eyes found hers, desperate. "It's okay," Vivian said. "Look, there's your papa. See him?" Noah's gaze shifted to Caleb, who was standing very still, his whole body radiating the need to go to his son, but knowing he had to let Noah come to him. "You can go to him if you want," Vivian said. "Or you can stay with me. Either way is fine." Noah took a shuddering breath, then another. Then, very slowly, he walked toward Caleb. Not running, not hiding, walking. When he reached his father, Caleb very carefully put his hand on Noah's shoulder. Noah didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into the touch, and Vivian saw several people in the courtroom react, faces softening, positions shifting. "Noah," Judge Thornton said, his voice gentler than it had been all day. "I'm Judge Thornton. Do you know why you're here?" Noah's hands tightened on the wood. He didn't answer. "It's all right if you don't want to talk," Thornton continued, "but I need to ask you some questions. You can nod or shake your head if that's easier. Does that work?" Noah gave the smallest nod. "Good. Are you afraid of your father?" A sharp shake of the head. "No." "Does he hurt you or neglect you?" Another shake. "No." "Do you feel safe at home?" Noah hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." "And Mrs. Mercer?" Thornton gestured at Vivian. "Do you like having her there?" Noah looked at Vivian, and something in his face shifted. He nodded again, more firmly this time. Everett made a sound of disgust from his seat. "Your Honor, the child is clearly being coached." "Mr. Mercer," Thornton said sharply, "you'll have your chance to speak. Right now I'm observing." He turned back to Noah. "One more question. If you could choose, stay at home with your father and Mrs. Mercer, or go to a place with doctors who might be able to help you, what would you choose?" It was a trap of a question. Vivian could see that. If Noah chose home, Carlisle would argue he didn't understand what was best for him. If he chose the institution, it was over. Noah didn't answer right away. He looked at Caleb, then at Vivian, then down at the piece of wood in his hands. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. And then, in a voice that was small but clear enough to carry in the silent courtroom, he said, "Home. Want to go home." The room erupted. Everett was on his feet shouting about coaching and manipulation. Carlisle was objecting. Several spectators were talking at once. But Vivian only had eyes for Noah, who'd spoken in front of all these strangers despite his terror, because the alternative was worse. Judge Thornton banged his gavel. "Order! Everyone sit down and be quiet, or I'll clear this room." The noise subsided. Thornton looked at Noah for a long moment, then at Caleb, then at Vivian. His face was still unreadable, but something had changed in his eyes. "We'll take a brief recess," he said. "When we return, I'll hear closing statements and render my decision." As they filed out, Caleb picked up Noah and carried him back to the side room. The boy was shaking, completely spent from the effort of speaking, of being present in that room full of eyes and expectations. "You did so good," Caleb kept saying into his son's hair. "So good. I'm so proud of you." Vivian stood in the doorway watching them, and Martha came up beside her. "That might have done it," Martha said quietly. Seeing him speak, seeing him choose. Thornton's not a cruel man. He has to have seen what we all saw. That boy knows where he belongs. "I hope you're right," Vivian said. "We'll know soon enough." When they reconvened, Carlisle gave his closing statement first. He acknowledged Noah's testimony, but argued it only showed how deeply the child was attached to the only life he knew, which didn't mean it was the best life for him. He painted a picture of future years, of Noah growing into a man without skills or ability to function in society, becoming a burden first to Caleb and eventually to the state. He spoke about the potential for real improvement at Riverside Institute, about trained professionals and structured programs. Then it was Caleb's turn. He stood, and for a moment he just looked at the judge. Then he said, "Your Honor, I'm not going to pretend I know all the right answers. I'm not a doctor or an expert. I'm just a father trying to do right by his son. And maybe I've made mistakes. Maybe I should have done things differently. But I know one thing for certain, my son is not a burden. He's not a problem to be solved or a shame to be hidden away. He's a child who deserves to grow up in a home where people love him for who he is, not who they wish he'd be." Caleb's voice was steady, gaining strength. "You saw him today. You saw him scared but trying, speaking when it's hard for him, trusting when he's got every reason not to. That's not a child who needs to be locked away. That's a child who's already braver than most adults in this room. And if you send him to that institution, you'll kill that bravery. You'll teach him that being different is something to be ashamed of, something that needs to be fixed. You'll break his spirit trying to make him fit a mold he was never meant to fit." He paused, his hands gripping the edge of the table. "My wife told you about her brother, about what happens when children like Noah get sent away. I'm asking you, begging you, don't let that happen to my son. He's got a home. He's got people who love him. He's got a chance at a life that's his own, on his own terms. That's more than any institution will ever give him." Caleb sat down, and the courtroom was completely quiet. Judge Thornton looked down at his papers for a long time. Then he looked up. "I've heard a lot of testimony today," he said, "arguments on both sides. And I'll admit, this is one of the harder decisions I've faced." He paused. "Mr. Everett Mercer, I don't doubt your concern for your nephew. I believe you think you're acting in his best interest. But I've also sat on this bench long enough to recognize when someone is more concerned with propriety than with people." Everett's face flushed dark red. "As for the medical testimony," Thornton continued, "I give it weight. But I also note that Dr. Morrison hasn't seen this child in 3 years, and his examination at that time was conducted under the worst possible circumstances. A 20-minute evaluation of a grieving child is not sufficient basis to condemn him to institutional life." Vivian's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "I've also noted the testimony of multiple witnesses who've observed Noah Mercer recently and attest to his progress. And most importantly," Thornton looked directly at where Noah sat with Caleb, "I've seen the child myself. I've seen him respond to his father and to Mrs. Mercer with clear trust and affection. I've heard him speak, which several witnesses testified was a rare occurrence. And I've seen him make a choice about his own life when given the opportunity." The judge took a breath. "It is the finding of this court that Noah Mercer is adequately cared for in his current home. While his needs are significant, there is no evidence of neglect or abuse. On the contrary, there is substantial evidence that he is bonded to his father and stepmother and is making developmental progress under their care. Therefore, the petition for change of custody is denied. Noah Mercer will remain with his father, Caleb Mercer." The gavel came down, and for a moment Vivian couldn't process the words. Then they hit her all at once, and she turned to Caleb and saw tears streaming down his face. They'd won. Behind them, Martha and the others were celebrating quietly. Across the aisle, Everett was on his feet, his face thunderous, arguing with Carlyle in harsh whispers. But Vivian didn't care about any of that. She cared about the little boy who was looking up at his father with something like wonder, like he couldn't quite believe it was over, that he was safe. Caleb picked up Noah and held him tight, and Noah, miracle of miracles, wrapped his thin arms around his father's neck and held on. Vivian stood and put her hand on both of them, completing the circle. Outside, the October afternoon was fading into evening, and somewhere in the distance she could hear the sounds of Blackstone Hollow going about its business, unaware that inside this courtroom, a family had just fought for its life and won. They didn't go straight home. Caleb drove the wagon toward the ranch but pulled off about a mile before they reached it, guiding the horses to a small clearing overlooking the valley. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed too vivid to be real, and the first stars were beginning to show themselves in the darkening east. Noah had fallen asleep against Vivian's shoulder, exhausted from the day's emotions. His face was peaceful in a way she'd rarely seen it. No tension around his eyes, no tightness in his jaw. Just a sleeping child who'd fought a battle no 8-year-old should have to fight, and come out the other side. Caleb sat with the reins loose in his hands, staring out at the mountains like he was trying to memorize them. Or maybe like he was seeing them for the first time, I keep waiting to wake up, he said finally. Keep thinking I'm going to open my eyes and we'll still be in that courtroom and the judge will be saying something different. It's real, Vivian said quietly. We won. Noah gets to stay. Because of you. Caleb turned to look at her, and in the fading light, his face was stark with emotion. If you hadn't come, if you hadn't stayed, if you hadn't married me and stood up there and fought, you would have found another way, Vivian interrupted. You're his father. You would have kept fighting. Maybe. But I wouldn't have won. Not alone. Caleb's voice cracked slightly. 3 weeks ago, I was ready to give up. Not on Noah, never on him, but on the idea that anyone else would ever understand. That anyone would ever see him the way I do. And then you showed up and just... He gestured helplessly. You saw him, right from the start. You knew what he needed. I knew what my brother needed. It's not the same, but it's close enough. Vivian adjusted her arm around Noah's sleeping form. And I didn't do this alone either. Martha and the others, they stood up when they didn't have to. Your neighbors saw what was right, and they acted. That matters. It does, Caleb agreed. But you're the one who made it possible. You're the one who gave me hope that things could be different. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I know this marriage isn't what either of us planned. I know it started as a practical arrangement, a way to fight Everett. But I want you to know, if you want to stay, really stay, as a real family, I'd like that. More than I can probably say properly. Vivian felt something warm unfold in her chest. Not love. Not yet. They were too new to each other for that word, but something like it. The beginning of it. I'm staying, she said. Not because of paperwork or because I feel obligated. I'm staying because this... She gestured at the three of them in the wagon, at the ranch waiting below, at the mountain standing sentinel. This feels like home. For the first time since I lost my family, this feels like where I'm supposed to be. Caleb reached out and took her hand, the one not supporting Noah. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. Then welcome home, Vivian Mercer. She squeezed his hand. Thank you for letting me in. They sat like that as full dark came on. Three people who'd found each other through desperation and necessity and had somehow built something worth keeping. The days that followed the hearing were strange in their normalcy. Vivian had expected some grand change, some dramatic shift, but life on the ranch simply continued. Horses still needed feeding, fences still needed mending, winter was still coming and preparations had to be made. The work didn't stop just because they'd won a legal battle. But small things were different. Noah started coming downstairs in the mornings without being called, sitting at the table while Vivian made breakfast. He didn't always eat with them, but he was present. Some mornings he'd look at Caleb and say, "Morning, Papa," in that soft voice, and Caleb would freeze with his coffee cup halfway to his mouth, like he couldn't quite believe it was real. One afternoon, about a week after the hearing, Vivian was in the garden pulling up the last of the root vegetables when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find three women standing at the edge of the garden plot. Not Martha and her friends this time, but strangers. Well, not complete strangers. She recognized one of them from church, another from the general store. Mrs. Mercer, the church woman said. Her name was Caroline something, Vivian remembered. We wanted to come by and, well, we wanted to apologize. Vivian stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. Apologize for what? For not helping sooner. Caroline twisted her hands together. We all knew what Everett was trying to do. We knew it wasn't right, but he has so much influence, and we were afraid of making trouble for our families if we spoke up. But then you did it anyway, the store woman, Rebecca, maybe, added. You and Caleb stood up to him, and you won. And we realized we should have been standing with you from the start. The third woman, young and pregnant, stepped forward. My sister has a daughter who doesn't speak. She's 5 now. And people keep telling my sister there's something wrong with her, that she should send her away to be fixed. But after seeing how you fought for Noah, after hearing what you said about children being different, not broken, it gave my sister courage to stand her ground. She wanted me to tell you that, to say thank you. Vivian felt her throat tighten. I didn't do anything special. I just refused to let them hurt a child. That's more than most people do, Caroline said. And it matters. You've changed how folks think about things. Not everyone, maybe. But some of us are paying attention now. They didn't stay long, just long enough to offer their apologies and their support. But after they left, Vivian stood in the garden thinking about ripples, about how one person standing firm could give other people permission to do the same, about how change didn't always come from grand gestures, but from small acts of courage repeated over and over. That evening at supper, she mentioned the visitors to Caleb. He listened, then shook his head in wonder. Never thought I'd see the day when people came out here to apologize for not helping me. Usually it's the opposite, people telling me what I'm doing wrong. Maybe they're learning, Vivian said. Or maybe they just needed to see that standing up to power is possible. Either way, it's something. Caleb glanced at Noah, who was carefully arranging his peas into groups of 3. Things are changing in this town. Slowly, but changing. He was right. Over the next few weeks, Vivian noticed shifts in how people treated them when they went into Blackstone Hollow. Fewer stares, more nods of greeting. Harold Brennan started slipping extra supplies into their orders without charging. The blacksmith's wife brought over a basket of preserves with a note saying she admired what they'd done. Even Reverend Walsh, who'd refused to perform their wedding, stopped Caleb outside the feed store to say he'd been thinking about his sermon on judging others and maybe needed to practice what he preached. Not everyone changed their minds. There were still people who crossed the street to avoid them, who whispered behind their hands, who thought Noah should have been sent away. But they were quieter about it now. The town had seen a family fight for itself and win, and that victory had shifted something fundamental. Winter came early that year, just as Caleb had predicted. The first real snow fell in late October, covering the ranch in white and making the world go quiet. Vivian had grown up with Missouri winters, but Montana cold was different, sharper, deeper, more insistent. She learned to dress in layers to keep the fires going, to check on the animals multiple times a day. And she learned about Noah in winter. He loved the snow. Loved it in a way that surprised both Vivian and Caleb. He would stand at his window for hours watching it fall, or go outside and let it pile up on his outstretched hands, or trace patterns in the fresh powder with a stick. The cold didn't seem to bother him. The quiet of snow-muffled mornings seemed to calm something in him that was always a little anxious the rest of the year. One afternoon in early November, Vivian looked out the kitchen window and saw Noah and Caleb in the yard. Caleb was showing Noah how to stack firewood properly, and Noah was actually helping, slowly, carefully, placing each piece just so. When the stack was complete, Noah stepped back and looked at it with the same intensity he brought to everything, and Caleb put his hand on the boy's shoulder and said something that made Noah almost smile. Watching them, Vivian felt something settle in her chest. This was what family looked like. Not perfect, not easy, but real. 2 people learning to understand each other, building trust, one careful gesture at a time. She thought about the women who'd run from this place, about how they'd looked at Noah and seen only difficulty, only problems. They'd missed this, the quiet moments of connection, the small victories, the particular joy of watching a child be himself without apology. Their loss, Vivian thought, and her gain. December brought harder cold and deeper snow. It also brought an unexpected visitor. Vivian was making bread when she heard the horse. She looked out to see a rider approaching. Not Everett this time, but a younger man she didn't recognize. He dismounted and knocked on the door with the careful politeness of someone who wasn't sure of his welcome. Caleb answered, and Vivian heard him make a surprised sound. James? Hello, cousin. The visitor pulled off his hat. He had the Mercer build and coloring, but his face was open where Everett's was hard. Can I come in? It's colder than hell out here. Caleb stepped aside and James entered, bringing a blast of cold air with him. He nodded to Vivian. Ma'am, you must be the famous Vivian Mercer I've been hearing about. Famous is probably overstating it, Vivian said, wiping flour from her hands. Not in my family, it isn't. You're the woman who stood up to Uncle Everett in court and won. That makes you practically legendary. James grinned. I rode out here to shake your hand and tell you that some of us Mercers think you did exactly the right thing. Some of us? Caleb asked carefully. Me and my sister Caroline, for sure. My father, Everett's brother Thomas, is still deciding what he thinks. But he's not happy with how Uncle handled things. Said it was mean-spirited and unnecessary. James looked around the house. Is Noah here? I'd like to meet him if that's all right. Caleb's expression was wary. Why? Because he's family. Because Uncle Everett has been telling stories about him for years, and I want to see for myself what's true and what's not. James's tone was sincere. Look, I know you don't have reason to trust Mercers right now, but I'm not my uncle. I don't think children should be locked away for being different. I just want to meet my cousin's son, that's all. Caleb and Vivian exchanged a glance. Finally, Caleb nodded. He's in the barn. I'll take you out there. But James, if you upset him, you leave immediately. Understood? Understood. They went out together, and Vivian watched from the window as Caleb led James to the barn. She couldn't see what happened inside, but they were gone for about 15 minutes. When they came back, James looked thoughtful. He's a good kid, he said to Vivian. Quiet, sure. Different, yes. But good. I could see that. He turned to Caleb. Uncle Everett was wrong. About all of it. And I wanted you to know that not everyone in the family agrees with him. I appreciate you saying that, Caleb said. James put his hat back on. I also wanted to warn you. Uncle hasn't given up. He's talking about appealing the judge's decision, finding other legal angles. He's angry about losing, and angry men do stupid things.
Vivian felt ice form in her stomach. Can he appeal? He can try. Probably won't succeed. Judge Thornton's ruling was pretty clear, but he can make your lives difficult in the attempt. James looked apologetic. I'm sorry. I wish I could tell you it's over. But with Uncle Everett, it's never really over until he decides it is. After James left, Caleb sank into a chair and put his head in his hands. I thought we were done with this. We knew it might not be finished, Vivian said, though her own heart was sinking. Everett's not the type to accept defeat gracefully. I'm so tired of fighting him. So tired of looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next attack. Caleb's voice was muffled. When does it end? Vivian didn't have an answer for that. She just put her hand on his shoulder and stayed there until his breathing evened out. The winter months passed in a strange duality. On one hand, the ranch was peaceful. Snow insulated them from the outside world, made everything quiet and still. Noah continued to make small progressions. More words, more eye contact, more moments of connection. He started helping with small chores, learned to feed the chickens without scaring them, began to trust that his world wasn't going to collapse every time something changed.
On the other hand, Everett's shadow hung over everything. His lawyers filed motions and appeals, dragging the legal process out. Nothing came of it. Every judge who looked at the case sided with Caleb, but each new filing meant new stress, new worry, new energy spent on fighting instead of living. He's trying to wear us down, Vivian said one night in January, as they reviewed yet another legal document. Make us so tired that we give up. It's working, Caleb admitted. I'm exhausted, and I hate that Noah can sense it, that he knows something's wrong even if he doesn't understand what. Then we need to end this, Vivian said. Not legally, we can't control what Everett does there, but we need to end it in our own minds. Stop letting him take up space in our lives. How do we do that? Vivian thought about it. We live. We focus on Noah and the ranch and building our life together. We acknowledge that Everett exists, that he's a threat, but we don't give him more power than he actually has. He can file all the motions he wants, but he can't take Noah as long as we keep fighting. So we keep fighting, but we don't let the fight become our whole life. Caleb looked at her with something like awe. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I'm just stubborn. Vivian managed a smile. And I'm tired of letting that man dictate how we feel in our own home. This is our house, our family. He doesn't get to poison it. It was easier said than done, but they tried. When legal papers arrived, they dealt with them efficiently and then put them away. They stopped talking about Everett at meals, stopped letting worry about his next move dominate their conversations. They focused instead on the daily rhythms of ranch life, on Noah's gradual opening up, on learning to be a family. In February, on a brutally cold afternoon when the wind was howling and the temperature had dropped below zero, Noah did something remarkable. He came downstairs carrying his piece of wood and walked straight to Vivian, who was mending socks by the fire. Without a word, he held the wood out to her. You want me to have this? She asked gently. Noah shook his head. Then he pressed it into her palm and closed her fingers around it. And in a voice that was getting stronger every day, he said, Keep it safe. For me. Of course, Vivian said, her throat tight. Always. Noah looked at her seriously. You're my mama now? The The question hit Vivian like a physical blow. She glanced at Caleb, who'd frozen in place across the room. Then she looked back at Noah and decided that truth was always better than pretty lies.
"I'm not the mama who gave birth to you," she said carefully. "That was Sarah, and she loved you very much. But I'm the mama who's here now, the mama who's going to stay, if that's what you want." Noah considered this with the gravity he brought to everything important. Then he nodded. "Okay, you stay." He went back upstairs, leaving Vivian and Caleb staring at each other. "Did that just happen?" Caleb asked. "I think so." Vivian looked down at the piece of wood in her hand, worn smooth by years of a small boy's anxious grip. "He called me Mama." "He did?" Caleb came over and sat beside her. "Sarah would have liked you, I think. Would have been glad you're here." "You think so?" "I know so. She wanted Noah to be happy and safe more than anything. You've given him both." Caleb's hand found hers. "You've given us both that."
March brought the first hints of spring. Snow melting during the day, icicles dripping from the eaves, the sun staying up a little longer each evening. And it brought news from town that Martha delivered personally. "Everett's dropped the appeals," she announced, bustling into the house with snow melt on her boots. "All of them. His lawyer filed papers this morning withdrawing every motion." Vivian felt her heart skip. "Why? What changed?" "Near as I can tell, Judge Thornton got tired of seeing the same case over and over. He called Everett and his lawyer into chambers last week and apparently read them the Riot Act, told them they were wasting the court's time, and if they filed one more frivolous motion, he'd sanction them both." Martha grinned. "Everett doesn't like being threatened with financial penalties. He withdrew everything." Caleb had gone very still. "So it's over? Really over?"
"As over as it's going to get. He could try again, but it would cost him money and reputation, and I don't think his pride can take another loss." Martha's expression sobered. "That said, I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him. Keep your guard up." After Martha left, Vivian and Caleb sat in silence for a long time. Then Caleb said, "I don't know what to do with this feeling." "What feeling?" "Relief. Hope. Like maybe we actually get to just live now, without constantly looking over our shoulders." He laughed, but it sounded shaky. "I'm afraid to believe it." "So don't believe it all at once," Vivian said. "Just believe it a little bit each day. See what happens." What happened was spring. Real spring, with the snow melting in earnest and the ground turning to mud and then to grass. The creek ran high with snowmelt, and wildflowers started appearing in impossible colors. Caleb began preparing the fields for planting, and Noah started following him around more, watching how things worked with that intense focus he brought to everything. One morning in April, Vivian was hanging laundry when she noticed Noah crouched by the garden plot, digging in the dirt with a stick. She walked over to see what he was doing. He'd made a pattern of some kind, lines and circles that might have been random or might have been deeply meaningful. She couldn't tell which. "That's interesting," she said. "What are you making?" "Garden," Noah said. "For Mama. First Mama and second Mama." Vivian's breath caught. "A garden for both of us?" Noah nodded. He pointed to one circle. "Flowers Sarah liked." Then to another. "Flowers you like." "How do you know what flowers I like?" "You stopped and looked at them. On the way to town, the yellow ones." Noah's voice was matter-of-fact. "You smiled." Vivian thought back and realized he was right. She'd seen some early wildflowers blooming beside the road and had paused to admire them. She hadn't thought anyone noticed, but Noah noticed everything. "That's a beautiful idea," she said softly. "Should we plant it together?" Noah looked up at her, squinting against the sun. "You know how?" "Some. My mother taught me a little." Vivian knelt beside him in the dirt. "We can figure it out together." They spent the afternoon planning the garden, where things would go, what they'd plant, how they'd arrange it. Caleb came to check on them at one point and found them both covered in mud, arguing good-naturedly about whether roses should go in the back or the front. "Roses are tall," Vivian was saying. "They need to be in back so they don't block the smaller flowers." "But then you can't see them good," Noah countered. His grammar wasn't perfect, but he was stringing longer sentences together now. "Want them where everyone can see." "We could do both," Caleb suggested, sitting down to join them. "Some in back, some in front. Make it interesting." Noah considered this, then nodded.
Okay, both is good. They worked until the sun started setting, and by the end they had a rough plan sketched out in the dirt. It wouldn't be a fancy garden, they were ranchers, not horticulturists, but it would be theirs. A memorial to Sarah and a celebration of new growth, all mixed together the way life actually was. That night, as Vivian was putting Noah to bed, a routine they'd developed over the winter, he looked up at her seriously. "Are you happy here?" he asked. "Very happy," Vivian said. "Why do you ask?" "The other ladies left. They weren't happy." Noah's hands fidgeted with his blanket. "Want you to stay." "I'm not going anywhere," Vivian promised. "I'm happy here because this is home, because you and your papa are my family now." Even though I'm different? The question was so direct, so vulnerable, that Vivian had to take a moment to compose herself. Especially because you're different. You see things other people miss. You care about things deeply. You're brave even when you're scared. Those aren't things to fix, Noah. Those are things that make you who you are. Noah thought about this. Uncle Everett said I'm broken. Uncle Everett is wrong about a lot of things. Vivian tucked the blanket around him. You're not broken. You're just you, and you is exactly right. Okay. Noah's eyes were starting to close. Love you, Mama. The words were soft, sleep-blurred, probably said without full awareness, but they settled into Vivian's heart like they'd been waiting there all along. Love you too, sweetheart, she whispered. Summer came with long days and hard work. The garden took shape, not perfectly, because perfection wasn't the point, but beautifully in its own way. Roses and daisies and the yellow wildflowers Noah had remembered Vivian admiring. Some things grew better than others, some died despite their best efforts. But the garden persisted, a living thing that changed every day. Noah spent hours there, weeding with careful attention, talking to the plants in his quiet voice, bringing Vivian reports on what was blooming. His speech was improving steadily. Not fluent, probably never would be completely, but functional. He could express what he needed, ask questions, even tell simple stories about his day. The town had settled into a new normal regarding the Mercer family. Most people had accepted that Noah was staying, that this was how things were going to be. A few remained hostile, but they were outnumbered now by folks who'd decided that difference wasn't the same as wrong. The shift wasn't complete. Prejudice never disappeared entirely. But it was real. In July, the ranch hosted its first social event. Martha convinced Vivian to have a summer gathering. Nothing fancy, just neighbors coming together for food and conversation. Vivian was nervous about how Noah would handle a crowd, but he surprised her. He didn't join the gathering exactly. He stayed on the edges, watching from safe distances. But he didn't hide either, and when Margaret Cooper's grandson, a shy boy about Noah's age, wandered over to look at the garden, Noah actually showed him around. They didn't talk much, but they existed in the same space peacefully, which felt like progress. Caleb watched his son interact with another child and had to step away for a moment, overcome. Vivian found him behind the barn, wiping his eyes. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah, just..." He gestured helplessly toward where Noah and the other boy were examining a beetle. A year ago, I couldn't imagine him doing that, being near another child without panicking, and now look at him. He's growing up, Vivian said, in his own way, at his own pace. Because of you. Because of all of us. Vivian leaned against him. You loved him when everyone said he wasn't worth loving. I helped him see he could trust again. The town decided to stop being afraid of what they didn't understand. It's not any one thing. It's everything together. Caleb put his arm around her. When did this become real? He asked quietly. What? This. Us. This marriage started as a legal strategy, but somewhere along the way it became... He trailed off. A real marriage, Vivian finished. I don't know exactly when, but it did. Yeah, Caleb turned to face her. I love you. I should have said it before now, but I didn't know how. Or I was afraid you didn't feel the same, but I do. Love you, in case that wasn't obvious. Vivian smiled. It was a little obvious. And for the record, I love you too. You and Noah both. They kissed there behind the barn while their guests enjoyed the gathering, and Noah showed another child his garden, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Autumn came, as it always did, painting the mountains in golds and reds. A year had passed since Vivian arrived in Blackstone Hollow.
since she'd stepped off that stage and into a life she couldn't have predicted. The anniversary arrived without fanfare, just another day of work and routine and the small moments that made up a life. But that evening, Caleb mentioned it at supper. "A year ago today, you showed up at this ranch," he said, "convinced you could handle whatever was waiting for you." "I wasn't convinced," Vivian admitted. "I was terrified. But sometimes you do things even when you're scared." "Good thing you did." Caleb reached across the table and took her hand. "Best thing that ever happened to this family." Noah looked up from his plate. He'd been quiet during the meal, but now he spoke. "Mama stayed when the others left. That's because she's brave." "Very brave," Caleb agreed. "Not brave," Vivian protested, "just stubborn."
Brave, Noah insisted. He was getting better at disagreeing, at holding his own opinions. "You fought for us. That's brave." Vivian felt tears prick her eyes. "Well, you fought too. Standing up in that courtroom, speaking when it was hard. We all fought together." "And we won," Noah said, like it was a simple fact, which it was. They had won. Not just the custody battle, though that mattered. They'd won something bigger, the right to exist as they were, without shame or apology. The right to be a family on their own terms. As winter approached again, Vivian sometimes thought about those 4 women who'd run from this place. She didn't judge them exactly. Everyone had their limits, their fears, their own histories that shaped what they could handle. But she did feel a deep gratitude that she'd been the one who stayed, that she'd looked at a frightened little boy and seen not a problem, but a person, that she'd chosen to build something instead of running away from difficulty. One evening in late November, snow falling soft and thick outside, the 3 of them sat by the fire. Noah was drawing in a notebook Vivian had bought him. He'd discovered he liked sketching, had a real talent for capturing details. Caleb was reading by lamplight. Vivian was mending a shirt. Normal, domestic, unremarkable, and perfect in its unremarkability. "Mama?" Noah said without looking up from his drawing. "I'm glad you're the one who stayed." Vivian set down her mending. "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." Outside, the snow continued falling, covering the ranch in white. The mountains stood watch as they always had, indifferent and eternal. The world turned toward winter, toward cold and darkness. But inside the house, there was warmth and light and the quiet peace of people who belonged together. 4 brides had looked at this life and seen impossibility. But Vivian Hale, Vivian Mercer now, had looked at the same life and seen home, had seen a father fighting for his son, had seen a child who needed someone to fight for him, had seen the chance to build something real and lasting from the broken pieces everyone else had abandoned. She'd stayed when staying was hard. She'd fought when fighting seemed hopeless. She'd loved when love would have been easier to withhold. And in doing so, she'd saved more than just Noah. She'd saved Caleb from the slow death of isolation and hopelessness. She'd saved herself from a life of regret and what-ifs. She'd saved a whole family from being torn apart by people who couldn't see past their own fear of difference. The ranch that had symbolized failure and rejection had become something new, a place where different was accepted, where love mattered more than normal, where family was defined not by perfection but by commitment. Years later, when people in Blackstone Hollow told the story, they'd talk about the bride who stayed, about the woman who stood up to Everett Mercer and won, about the family that proved love was stronger than judgment. But the real story was quieter than that. It was about small moments, a hand reaching across empty space, a child learning to trust again, a man discovering he didn't have to face everything alone, a woman finding purpose in protecting someone else's child. It was about the daily work of showing up, of trying, of choosing each other over and over, even when it was hard. It was about the radical act of seeing people as they were and deciding that was enough. Noah grew up at that ranch. Not normal, he was never going to be normal, whatever that meant, but whole. He learned to manage his fears, to communicate in ways that worked for him, to find his place in a world that hadn't been built for people like him. He became a talented artist, a skilled horseman, a quiet but steady presence who made the ranch run smoothly alongside his father. And he remembered. He remembered the woman who came from Missouri and refused to let them send him away. The woman who sat on the floor with him until he felt safe enough to reach out. The woman who looked at a frightened, different child and saw someone worth fighting for. He remembered all of it, and he made sure his own children knew the story, not as a fairy tale, but as the truth. That sometimes the family you're born into isn't enough, and you have to build the family you need. That different isn't wrong. That love is a choice you make every day, not a feeling that happens to you. That staying matters more than arriving. On cold winter nights, when the wind howled down from the mountains and the world seemed impossibly dark, Vivian would sometimes think back to that first day, standing in the dusty street of Blackstone Hollow with her trunk and her determination, watching the town watch her, knowing they expected her to fail. She'd proven them wrong, not because she was special or particularly wise or braver than anyone else, but because she'd made a choice and stuck to it, because she'd seen what mattered and fought for it, because she'd understood something fundamental that those other women had missed, that building a family wasn't about ease or convenience or everything going smoothly. It was about showing up, day after day, in small ways and large ones, in moments of triumph and moments of sheer exhausted stubbornness. It was about looking at someone else's needs and deciding they were as important as your own. It was about fighting for the people you loved even when, especially when, the world told you they weren't worth the trouble. Vivian Mercer, the fifth bride, the one who stayed, knew this truth bone deep. And every morning when she woke up in that ranch house with Caleb beside her and Noah's footsteps overhead, she lived it again. Not perfectly, never perfectly, but truly, and that was enough.